Hello and welcome to Verse versus Verse. Today we're going to be doing a live stream of Civilization 6, specifically a run as Russia, a deity level run, which is the highest difficulty. We're going to be doing it on a small map, tiny is the technical term, with online speed, which just means really fast game speed to try to make sure this doesn't take like 50 hours worth of streams. For that, because we're going at such a fast speed, it's generally better to keep the map a little more tight. So usually you'd have 4 civs here, we're going to do 6 just to compress that all together. This is using the Gathering Storm expansion. We do have the Barbarian Clans mode on, but besides that, everything should be pretty much identical to the base game. So without any further ado, let's get started. For the purpose of this, the way this is supposed to work is essentially my wife said hi. Hi, Michelle. I am going to try to answer questions anyone might have about the Bible stuff. That's the main reason I'm doing this, really, is to talk about the Bible. But I understand as a channel this size that we're not going to have those coming in 24/7. So, going to hang out and play Civ 6 while we're at it. So whether you're here for the Civ or whether you're here for the Bible questions, anyone's welcome. In the meantime, since we are doing an attempt at a religious run, simply because I felt that was thematic to the live stream, we're playing as Russia. Oh, that is not good. So what we want is a lot of tundra, like snowy places, because we get a bonus to the to building holy sites. It gives if you set things up properly, you can get a bonus to production and to faith if you have them in icy areas like down here. And we did not spawn there. We did spawn on a hill on a river, and all that's nice. We have some good resources next to us. So if we weren't playing as Russia, actually this would be a great spot. Good defensiveness with the mountains, going to give good adjacency bonuses. But the lack of tundra right next to us is slightly problematic. Since holy sites do get adjacency bonuses for the mountains, we probably can just stay here and set up the holy site somewhere around in this area. But we're going to want a second city that comes down here to take advantage of this icy stuff later on. As for right now, I think this is probably the right starting point so that we can take advantage of this tile and get access to this tile sooner to get production up. Although we are going to have a little bit of a food issue with the capital. We can do like a farming triangle here later on. So, there we go, St. Petersburg. Can I explain the Trinity? Starting off with easy questions that have not been asked by all of the church since its founding, and puzzle us to this day. Things that are not at all beyond the comprehension of mortal minds. Yes, so the doctrine of the Trinity fundamentally states that. In one moment, okay, we want astrology. Not in the Trinity though. The doctrine of the Trinity fundamentally states that Jesus is God, the Father is God, and the Holy Spirit is God. So sometimes colloquially, you'll hear people say God when they mean the Father, as if God and the Father are different people. They are different persons, but they are both God. The Father is God, Jesus is God, the Holy Spirit is God. At the same time, even though they are all God, they are distinct persons in some sense of the term person, and people will debate what exactly person means in that context. But one way of saying it is essentially Jesus is God, the Father is God, the Spirit is God, Jesus is not the Father, Jesus is not the Spirit, and the Father is not the Spirit. How you go beyond that is a subject of much debate that has been going on for thousands of years and getting people kicked out of the church for that long. So I try not to draw too many hard lines beyond that point. There are two sort of schools of thought broadly as to how you would make those two things reconcile between God being three and God being one. One of those is called social Trinitarianism, which emphasizes the threeness of God. It treats the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit very much as three distinct persons who have love for one another and have, usually under a social Trinitarian model, would have distinct thoughts. Whereas under a Latin Trinitarian model, it's the other one, it more emphasizes the oneness of God. Both of those have some drawbacks. On the social Trinitarian side, you run into the issue where you start sounding like a polytheist, like you believe in three gods, which is not a Christian view. God is one. Whereas on the Latin Trinitarian side, you start sounding like a modalist, which is someone who thinks that there really aren't three separate persons of God. Instead, you have God kind of shape-shifting between the two forms. Like, you couldn't really see him in the same room at the same time because it's just God changing forms. which doesn't really work, for example, because baptism of Jesus, you have God the Father talking to Jesus while he's getting baptized and while the Holy Spirit is descending like a dove. So it doesn't really make sense to use a modalist model there, where it's just one person appearing in three ways because they're all there at the same time. So drawbacks to both views, and most people lean one way or the other, but fall somewhere in the middle. As for me, I lean a little more on the social Trinitarian side, but I believe the other two people on this channel, Jason Jordan, both lean more on the Latin Trinitarian side. So not anything to split over or anything. So for the game, we are on deity difficulty, which basically, once you get to that level, fundamentally the game is a little bit unfair against you, just with the AI getting so many advantages you don't have. You are likely to get steamrolled, and you are basically certain to be behind technologically and on the culture, on basically every metric. You're going to be running behind the whole game. But you have to find a way to overcome those adversities and to win anyway. So one effect of that is essentially in the early game, we are trying to create an advantage for us in our win condition, which here is trying to win by faith with the religious stuff, while not dying, which is why we're building these slingers. They're kind of like short-range archers because they can help us not die, which that and building a halfway decent civilization with a few cities and getting our holy sites set up, that's really the goal of the early game. We are on the continents mode, which means there's probably 2 continents with a map this size. There's at least 2. There could be more than 2, but usually it's just 2. And so it's a little surprising with the width we've covered that we haven't bumped into anyone yet. We can probably attack here without dying next turn, but we will see. So hopefully we're not alone on a continent. That would be... that's not good. That would be bad for a religious run to be totally on your own on a continent, but we also don't want too many neighbors because we don't want to be getting steamrolled by our friends. This is problematic. So if I attack him over this river, I'm going to get my butt kicked, but at the same time, it's going to take forever to get around. But we will just go the slow way so we don't lose that unit. We have a lot of mountains around us, which again is good for a religious-based civ, but is still slightly problematic from the perspective of getting high production tiles, because obviously you don't get production on the mountain tiles themselves or anything like that. What is my favorite Bible story? I need to find a way, by the way, to get these verses on this main monitor. I have them on a side monitor next to me that I'm not looking at regularly, so hopefully I'm not taking too long to answer these questions. What is my favorite Bible story? That is really difficult to give an answer to, because there are a lot of really good Bible stories. Well, let me think for a moment. Actually, that probably should have gone the other way. That's hard. The one that I find most amusing is just the entire book of Jonah. So I can talk about that one, but it does feel a little bad to pick a quote-unquote favorite Bible story and not talk about Jesus because, he's pretty significant. Yeah, Jonah. So in the book of Jonah, the reason I find it so amusing is essentially it goes against any preconceived notions you might have about how a prophet of God is supposed to act, and not really in a good way. Jonah is falling below expectations. So in the book of Jonah, you have Jonah, who's been sent by God to go and preach to the city of Nineveh about essentially to warn them that they're going to be destroyed if they don't repent. Jonah does not like the city of Nineveh, and frankly, he has pretty good reasons to not be crazy about them. Go here so we don't die. The city of Nineveh is the capital of the nation of Assyria. And Assyria is just about the most evil and destructive empire that ever existed on Earth. If it's not in first place in that regard, it is up there. And so essentially, Jonah wants the people of Assyria to be destroyed. He says as much in the last chapter of Jonah, in chapter 4. But God's sending Jonah to preach to the people of Assyria, which he is not excited to do. So Jonah does everything in his efforts, in his capacity that he can do to get away from God's command to go preach to the Assyrians, to go prophesy to the Assyrians. So first, God tells him to go a little bit, like just a little ways, not far at all, from Israel to get to Nineveh. It's basically modern day. I think, I'm actually blanking where they are in the modern day. It might be Iran. That's Persia, though. I don't remember if they were in the same place. But in any case, not far from Israel. Jonah declines and tries to go to Spain instead. Literally all the way to, it's like 20 times further as far as the total distance, going the opposite direction from where God told him to go. So he gets on a boat, and when he goes on that boat, he goes across the ocean to the best of his capacity alongside these sailors, who would have been thought to an early Hebrew audience to be sort of a rowdy and bad and debaucherous group of people. I mean, they're not even Jewish; they're just Gentile sailors who wouldn't be thought of as good people in any way by by the average early Jewish thought. Nevertheless, Jonah's on that boat. Jonah just falls asleep. There's this huge storm because, frankly, God's not thrilled that Jonah, his prophet, is basically just smacking the face of God and saying no and running away the other direction because he wants the Ninevites to all die. And so God sends this storm, and in response to that, all of the sailors immediately recognize that this must be the work of a great God, one that is greater than any of their gods. They start asking each other, like, who's your God? Who's your God? Who's your God? Because they're trying to figure out who sent this storm, right? And they can't figure it out. So eventually they figure out Jonah's passed out underneath the boat, like in the lower area of the boat. And they go get him, and they wake him up, and they're like, don't you care that we're going to die? You know, there's this big storm. Also, who's your God? What's going on here? So Jonah explains that he worships the God of the land and the sky and the sea. And he has decided to flee from that God on the sea, which is a really stupid and entertaining plan. So they immediately piece together what's going on here, having more insight than the prophet in this situation. And they refuse to sacrifice this prophet because he's a prophet of this God who must be the one true God. I mean, he sent this big storm. Whereas Jonah is like, no, it's fine. Just throw me overboard. So after Jonah insists they throw him overboard, he tosses over, which he later clarifies in chapter 4 again, that he was sacrificing himself to try to stop God's mission of saving the Ninevites. He thought if he threw himself overboard, he'd die, and he wouldn't have to save the Ninevites, which would be great, because he doesn't like those people. Nevertheless, God sends a big fish/whale, which people argue about, and I'm not entirely sure why that's the point of contention. God sends a big fish/whale, jumps up, grabs Jonah, and he's in the belly of the whale for 3 days. This whole story really parallels Jesus in a lot of really surprising and cool ways, because for one, there's a story in the New Testament where there's a big storm, and Jesus is on a boat, and he's asleep. And the storm comes, and his apostles come and wake him up and are like, don't you care, we're all going to die. Almost the exact same thing that the Gentile sailors said to Jonah. Jesus, though, unlike Jonah, does not throw himself overboard to try to curtail God's plans and stop them via getting swallowed by a large fish. Rather, Jesus basically wakes up, says they have little faith because, of course, he can stop the storm, and commands the storm to stop, and the storm stops, which is much more impressive than Jonah's methodology. And then, paralleling the big fish, underwater for 3 days thing, you have Jesus eventually sacrificing himself on the cross to save us from our sins, which is the exact opposite motivation that Jonah had. And you have to notice here, it's not just the parallel of sacrifice for sins, even the parallel of it being for Gentiles parallels Jonah quite well, because Jonah was not wanting to save the Ninevites, and Jesus was trying to save all of the nations of the world. People today very much emphasize Jesus's sacrifice as having a role in saving people, and that is hugely important. That's like the central thing. But another very central part of it was him allowing the kingdom of God to not be limited to just the Jewish people, and to also include the Gentiles, right? And so in that way, he's almost like an anti-Jonah in terms of his methodology and his mission and his superiority to Jonah. But there's still these parallels of passing out, people being worried they're going to die because of a storm on a boat while he's asleep, calming the storm in one way or another, and then being buried for 3 days and then rising again. So I'd think all of that's super cool. So I'd pick that one if I had to pick a favorite Bible story. In any case, right, so ideally with this, we want extra faith, and I think this breathtaking appeal. A lot of these might be breathtaking tiles. I'll have to check because they're close to mountains. That increases the appeal of the tiles. Let's see. The other options would be, we don't have rainforest. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of tundra. We could go tundra, but there's no space down here. It's very thin, so there's no point where it's going to be surrounded by just a bajillion tundra tiles. So usually this is what I would go with as Russia. I think this is far and away the strongest one in most situations, but I'm not sure anymore. I'm also not sure if this counts as it doesn't count as an adjacency bonus, because the adjacency is better because later on there's an ability to turn adjacency bonus to fade into production. So actually I changed my mind. I think we are going to go with this and just be a little sadder about it than we usually would be as Russia, to try to get that later adjacency bonus, which is going to give us production later in the game. So the main strategy here is, as Russia, you get a bonus on your trade routes. These don't have range. You get a bonus on your trade routes to up your science and your culture if the people you're trading with are ahead of you in those areas. And so essentially we are going to willfully fall behind in those areas, try to survive, build up our religious presence. This is really bad. Build up our religious presence and just catch up over time by trade routes, essentially. So the reason this is really bad is because of all of the civilizations in the game that are likely to just steamroll you in the early game, the only one I would argue that's more dangerous than Tomris is Moctezuma of the Aztecs. She gets an ability that doubles basically every time she makes any kind of horse-based. Oh, there's a civ up here. We know because the -5s implies there's a loyalty pressure, which has to be a civilization. Anyway, she has an ability where every time she builds a unit that uses horses, she gets 2 of them. And so she just builds a bajillion horses and then steamrolls you. So we're going to try to be nice to her and hope she doesn't, because this is one of the few civs where, frankly, if my approach is I'm just gonna resist the attack when she attacks, we will lose. So instead of that, we're just gonna be really nice to her and hope the attack doesn't happen at all, because otherwise we will die. Speaking of, time to give gifts to our new best friend. We can't give, well, once we can give open borders, we will do that, but you have to unrock, I think it's writing, or one of these gives open borders, I forget which one. In any event, we're getting our first Lavra, I don't know how to pronounce that. It's the holy site thing. We probably want it down here so that it's getting that adjacency bonus from the tundras. Actually, it doesn't matter because we already have that bonus set in. It's going to be the same either way. Okay, then yeah, up here is probably better. And that will be sort of the focus of our cities, is these holy sites to eventually give us production and to, of course, give us faith, which will help us in the ultimate goal to convert the entire world to our eventual religion and win that way. Although perhaps I should have done... No, Stonehenge requires... Never mind. I was thinking perhaps I should have done Stonehenge first before I did the holy site, but you can't... I don't think you can... Oh, no, you can build it before you build a holy site. That's funny. Anyway, holy site's probably better anyway because the adjacency bonus is just to get it up there. It only takes 2 turns. We do need this archery in case the plan of being nice to Tomris doesn't work out. And right now, even aside from Tomris, we're starting to run into issues with barbarians on both sides of us. And we're not likely to get help just because of the mountain geography. And as far as I know, there's no other civs down here. So it is nice that we have the space down here to expand. Based on that loyalties pressure, I'm guessing the continent is like Tomris's area up here, ours down here, and it might just be the 2 of us. But it's not ideal that we have barbarians everywhere with no one else to take them out. So the plan for now is we're going to try to get these 2 guys healed up to go take this out, and I haven't seen this spawn any more units that came this way, so we should be okay to waltz over here with our settler to expand that way. Okay. Oh, we do not have stone. That is why we can't build a Stonehenge. I suppose that makes sense. Okay, then we will just go for a shrine. That or settler would be good, but again, we don't have enough population because, like I said earlier, we're running into a bit of a food issue. So the option should probably shrine or builder to fix that. or slinger because of the barbarian issue. But I think we're going to be aggressive. We're going to go for the shrine, because if we don't, we're not going to get our own religion on this difficulty. And that would be, I mean, that just means we lose, essentially. You can't win a religious victory without a religion. So usually I would do like the rating or something to try to, I will get to that question in a second, to try to take advantage of these barbarian outposts, but there's so many of them, we just need to get rid of them. So, okay, Jay Salloway asks, what is the biblical model for ecumenical hierarchy / structure? So for those who don't know, Jace is actually one of the other creators on this channel, and I have confidence, knowing Jace, that the reason for this good question is at least partially because it's a hard question and he likes to watch me sweat. So there are many schools of thought on this, and I think that the Bible gives us liberty to have different opinions on this and to have different models for running the church that have slight differences without straying from the overall view of what the church is. I did not think that. I thought that was a melee unit. Anyway, that's not good either. So what does the Bible say about it? What are sort of the bounds of our liberty on that, in that department? First, I would say that in terms of leadership, there needs to be a two-tiered leadership structure of elders on one side and deacons on the other. Now, we translate those words like overseer or presbyter or whatever, a million different ways. Some people call them overseer, elder, presbyter, priest, bishop, pastor, all terms that essentially end up meaning the same thing. You need a leading body of people, and then you need a deacon body, which essentially means servant, a secondary body to take. The way it was actually, we went over this today at our church. The way it was explained there, they said that the eldership was in charge of spiritually leading the church, whereas the deacons were in charge of materially leading the church. So, doing things like making sure you have making sure that the all the utilities are working properly in the building would be something that deacons would likely be in charge of, because those things are incredibly important, and it's difficult for the elders to do everything. I do think there's a little bit more to it than that. I think that it's definitely a good thing for anyone in the church to be helping one another along spiritually, and I'm sure they meant to give account for that when they talked about it at our church. But in any case, the basic idea is that you have multiple elders, not generally just a single pastor or single elder, as sort of the core decision-making leadership, and then a team of deacons as sort of the practical group that makes stuff happen in the church. I think any church that's more or less following in that structure is doing fine. There's example in the first century where churches worked together across multiple churches, so it wasn't just an individual church operating completely on their own. And there were even examples where, say, Peter, James, and John would exercise leadership over multiple churches. As far as I'm aware, well, actually, I am certain of this. Biblically speaking, that wasn't super formalized, right? I mean, they met at like a council, right? The Jerusalem Council, and then Peter, James, and John gave their thoughts, which carried, it seems to be the majority view alongside Paul's thoughts on things. But it wasn't as though, frankly, like the Catholic Church will often say Peter was the first pope. I think that's mostly just wrong. If you were trying to say that Peter was a significant and unique leader of the early church, and they are building a papal model to try to copy Peter, which many of them do mean that, in fairness, that's not a completely unreasonable thing to say. I will say I don't think he's as unique as a Catholic mindset would believe, but beyond that, we'll just leave that where it is. That's what I mean when I say I don't think it was overly structural. It wasn't like the church at Rome was in charge of the entire church, but I don't want to dive too much into that. So, can there be work between multiple churches, even with authority figures of some sort exercising authority over other churches? Yes, I think that's okay. At the same time, these churches did seem to mostly operate at least like a day-to-day operations level independently, and to have some decision-making authority to operate as like one church on its own, apart from the authority of, say, the church at Rome, or the church at Jerusalem, or the church at Antioch. It changed over time which one was quote-unquote the primary church in the early Christian world. Not to say I don't think that the way... I think that it's okay if you provide more or less structure than that view, because I don't think this is something that's commanded. So hopefully that answered your question. I feel like I rambled a bit there and went a little more in-depth than maybe was necessary, but hopefully it answers the question. Okay, we probably want to build a holy site here, because it's going to get adjacency from all of this, and if we build here, we're going to get this tile too, so that's probably a decent place. It's not perfect, because the yields for production and food are really low, but once we get a holy site, it'll be a good city. So what about a national level structure like the UMC or SPC? I don't think there's anything in the Bible that says you can't do a national level structure. I don't think it is something that is biblically commanded, as in like you're supposed to do this. But I also don't think it's something that is wrong necessarily. There is room for error on both sides. If you have churches that are so separated that they just refuse to work with one another in any way, shape, or form, they just want to do their own thing and they don't want to basically share in any way, shape, or form, that's bad and that's unbiblical, and those churches should do things differently, should be willing to cooperate. But on the other hand, if you have for example, I'm sorry to pick on Catholics, I think they're amazing in a lot of ways, but if you have like a papal model where you have a singular individual who is exercising essentially limitless authority, subject hopefully to God's word, essentially limitless authority over the entire church, I would say that is going too far, and that is too far divorced from the model that we see in Scripture. But we were just getting crushed over here. But yeah, anyway, I think something like having the Southern Baptist Convention is acceptable to exist, though that doesn't mean everything that such an organization does is right or wrong. I mean, again, there's room for both on both sides for that. So we need to keep this because we are getting crushed by barbarians, and this is probably better than our other options. That or the extra production. Actually, I'm going to lean towards the production because we are not getting as much as we usually would, because our tiles are not great in terms of standard yields of production and food. So we're going to bring these back so that we can promote them to archers and try not to get our butts kicked by barbarians, which is pretty much what's happening so far. And see if we have anything we can give her. I don't think she's going to accept the delegation right now. Yeah, I didn't think so. Yeah, we're not even able to scout up north, so this run is not starting too well, but we can cross our fingers that we'll turn it around sooner or later. The good news is she's not coming south, so as long as that's happening, that increases our odds of not dying immediately, but we'll see how long we can keep that up. We very much need a settler, we very much need a builder, and a trader, and an archer. All of these things are desperate needs right now. So between those, because I can't even do a trader out to her yet anyway, because I haven't discovered any of her cities, and she's not accepting my delegation, I think we either go for the settler or the archer between those two. And I'm leaning towards settler, but that's probably just me being too greedy, so we're going to go archer. Yeah, I also like how civilization... So Jay Salloway says, I like how Civ allows multiple win cons, cultural tech, etc. Me too. I usually don't go for the religious wins. I do think they're fun. That was originally my favorite one. Oh no, we're going to lose that city. Yeah, I might have to restart this run. This is very much of the not good persuasion. Yeah, there's no way we get here in time. And that they didn't even take damage from the city. Well, we'll see. But yeah, I also like the multiple win cons. I think it adds a lot of fun and a lot of replayability to the game. Wow, I can't believe that thing's not even taking damage from the city. Anyway, okay, that's actually good. So these, not that it probably matters, we're probably toast here, but the in Civilization, different civs will have different motivations, and some of them are standard to the civ. I think she likes it when a civ has military power, which we don't, and we won't basically ever by her standards, but she likes it when people, this is random, that she likes it when people don't build wonders, which is good, because we're not going to be able to keep up on wonders anyway. So let's keep running over with the archer. That may or may not be able to save this run. And on the off chance we survive, let's go ahead and go for that settler we were talking about. Hey, and we got the holy site up. So going for a second archer probably doesn't help. Once this guy gets here, that's probably essentially all that we need over here. And honestly, by 7 turns, this problem is either dealt with or killed us either way. So we're just going to go for the shrine. Jason asks, do you feel like the Greeks had a cultural win in history, and how did that affect history of Judaism and Christianity? It depends what you mean by a cultural win. In Civ 6, it has to do with tourist movements, and to that effect, I would say no, it wasn't a super touristy movement. So at least in terms of being the exact same thing as Civ, not really, but I also don't think that's what you're asking. To the extent you mean, did their culture shape the entire known world in an extremely major way? Yeah, it very much did. How did that affect the history of Judaism and Christianity? You see really, really heavy effects on both of them. I mean, just as one random example, our word for hell has a few words that play into it. It is a combination of translations from Sheol, which is the Hebrew place of the dead, and Gehenna, which is the essentially eternal, think lake of fire from Revelation, eternal place that the lost go after Judgment Day. But the Greek word for Sheol is Hades, Hades, which is, you probably recognize that word, Hades, the Greek god of death. It's the same word because they were so heavily influenced by the Greeks. And you see a lot of the influence of, for example, Aristotle on a lot of biblical philosophy and ideas that you see in the Bible. Paul himself quotes from Stoic philosophers who were Greeks, and he almost directly quotes from Aristotle's household codes in Ephesians chapter 5 when he's talking about the roles of women, children, and slaves in that context, which is its own can of worms. Yeah, Greeks very much had a heavy influence on both Christians and Jews. I do not know the Jewish influence as well. I mean, obviously, if it's affecting first century Christianity, that's because it's affecting Judaism. But I'm not as well versed in how it affected them, because the ways it would affect them would be mostly sort of intertestamental writings, which I know a bit about, but I don't know enough about to speak super competently on it. So, Tomris is happy with me. That is shocking. She's not usually one. So Moctezuma will do this thing where he says he's happy with you and then declare war to like deceive you. Tomris doesn't usually do that, so she's probably actually happy with us, which is huge. If we can survive this down here, then this run may be salvageable, but we will see.
My lead.
Mysticism.
It's making me nervous down here.
Accidental and individual
Okay, we're gonna go for the. Oh, we can't because we don't have the right government yet. So one of the things we're really heavily trying to go for right now is great prophet points, so that we can get a great prophet, which is what you need to start a religion in this game. Because again, we can't win unless we get one, and on the deity difficulty, it's actually pretty hard to get one. So what would be the best way to do this? We need to get to political philosophy, so I guess we probably just run straight towards it. And usually we'd go fast towards early empire to get this settler production, but we're going to have three cities pretty soon anyway, and we're probably not growing past 4 in the short term, so we'll just go the other way and then do early empire and political philosophy next, which will give us room to place that tile that allows us to get the great prophet points, the one that we just unlocked. Where is that? I'm trying to show it to you, but I'm forgetting how to view. Yeah, it's under government. This tile. Where did it go? Huh. Well, there's a purple tile like this one that gives +2 great prophet points for a turn. I'm not sure why it's not showing. Hopefully it's not because all the religions have already been... Yes, it is. All right, we are going to turn the difficulty down because I haven't played in a while and we got crushed here. So just to clarify what just happened, all 3 religions that are allowed to be founded in this game have already been founded, which means it's impossible for us to win a religious victory, which pretty much defeats the point of this run. So we are going to restart. So now we know what we're doing. Let me actually We'll exit to main menu so that we can turn it down to immortal difficulty instead of deity. I've won deity before, but it's been a while, and this is not inspiring confidence into me with how poorly that run went. So we'll do the same thing, though, of Peter again. Jay Salloway asks, how did Docetism and Epicureanism affect modern interpretations of Scripture? So here we are actually going to cheat a little and use a handy Bible tool that a lot of people don't know about called Google. Because I've read about Docetism, but I haven't read about it recently, and I used to be able to define it, but not today. And I know Epicureanism has to do with Greek philosophy, but okay, in the history of Christianity, Docetism was the doctrine of the phenomenon of Jesus, is blah, 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 and above all forms, Jesus was more... Oh, yeah, this is a Gnostic thing. Yeah, it means seeming. That's what the term means in Greek. Okay, and let's grab Epicureanism. I have a better grip on this, but I still don't want to be wrong, so I'll just look at the definition. An ancient school of philosophy founded in Athens by Epicurus. I could have guessed that much. The school rejected determinism, good on you, and advocated hedonism as the highest form of good, but of a restrained kind. Mental pleasure was regarded more highly than physical, and the ultimate pleasure was held to be freedom from anxiety and pain, especially that arising from needless fear of death and of the gods. So yeah, that sounds very consistent with... Yeah, yes, that makes sense. Okay. So how did Docetism and Epicureanism affect modern interpretations of Scripture? Well, just under those two, I think it's somewhat clear. We will start with Docetism. So Docetism is this idea that Jesus only seemed to be physical. And it's coming from a background that essentially anything physical must be inherently bad. And that anything spiritual must be, for the most part. I mean, I think even Docetists wouldn't recognize spiritual evils, but usually when they say spiritual, they mean good thing. So spirit bad, physical world, or spirit good, physical world bad. You will see people today who, when they conceive of their idea of heaven, they only conceive of the spiritual reality. So they essentially think of people in heaven as kind of like spirits floating around in like a spiritual primordial soup almost, where we're just fully happy and fully in the presence of God, and there's no physical grounded nature to that. That view is not espoused biblically. There's a very reasonable possibility that what happens after you die but before Judgment Day could be something like that, because the Bible tells us after to die is to be with the Lord, and when Jesus dies on the cross, but before he does so, he tells the thief on the cross, truly I say to you, tonight you will be with me in paradise. So it seems something happens before Judgment Day where you're with God, and you don't appear to have your new body at that point. So there does seem to be a spiritual aspect there. But in terms of the eternal promise of heaven, very clearly, both the righteous and the wicked will be raised bodily. That's in one of the Johns, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, I forget which one, but it explicitly says that we will be raised bodily, whether we're righteous or wicked, and those who are lost will be cast away, and those who are saved will be saved. But the ones who are saved, again, this isn't like a primordial soup spiritual reality. This is a very physical, on new heaven and new earth, which is one place, reality of existing in a glorified body. And so the reason I talk about all of that is we have a modern influence in the church, very much like a Docetist, sort of Gnostic background of liking spiritual stuff, not liking physical stuff, that leads us to not recognize that reality, that heaven can be a physical experience, right? It's not something that is merely spiritual. And it's not that the physical world is bad, it's that the physical world was corrupted by the sin that entered through Adam and Eve. So I think a lot of that error from the Docetists, just hating anything physical and saying Jesus couldn't be physical because he was perfect and all of that, I think a lot of that persists today. As for Epicureanism, I don't feel as confident on that one to go into more depth on how it relates to the modern day. I will say that, this idea of hedonism, pleasure is the highest good, but of a restrained kind, focused on mental pleasure, does sound a lot like any self-help book you can find in the 21st century. Ideas of you just have to find a way to be happy. You have to find, chase your truth and go be happy. And I think that's perhaps a restrained good thing. Not the your truth part, but trying to have joy. That at least joy is a fruit of the Spirit, so I don't think it's bad, obviously. But I don't think it should be our highest calling is to make ourselves happy. So in that regard, I do see some parallels to the modern day. And I would also see this idea, especially that arising from needless fear of death and the gods, trying to not be afraid of God, not be afraid of death. See a lot of that in the church and anywhere today. I would say that most churches are focusing primarily on this idea that, death and hell are scary and God can save you from that. And so that's the point of Christianity, is to save you from that. On a certain level, I don't entirely disagree that those are incredibly important aspects of the faith. Christ does save us from those things. They are scary, and it's very good he does save us from that. But in my opinion, the central thing of Christianity that is really impactful and really the point of what we're doing here is that you were separated from God in sin in a way where you could not make yourself righteous. You could not fix it, and you could not go back to being in alignment with God's ways. Like, for example, a rock has a role as a rock of what it is supposed to do. It's supposed to sit there and be a rock. A bird is supposed to fly around. It's supposed to eat stuff. It has a role set forth by God. Humans had a role set forth by God, and we abandon that, and we can't get back to it of our own accord. We are irreconcilably trying to say that word, separated from what our purpose is as made by God, and we can't fix it. Through Christ's sacrifice and him allowing the Holy Spirit to enter into you, that allows you to go back into alignment with God. And to me, that purpose of being servants to God and worshiping God and being in alignment with what we were made to do and to be is the central thing of Christianity. And the fact that we get to live forever in heaven, that's good because we get to be in God's presence and continue to worship him and continue to be filled by his Spirit and walk in his ways as his children, which was our calling. It's not good just because we get to avoid the fiery place and stay in God's house, right? So I think this idea of almost, to an extent, hyperfixating on avoiding the fear of death is very present in the church today. And also, we are on a certain level supposed to fear God. I mean, to the extent that God is the mightiest and most just being in all of existence immeasurably, a healthy level of fear is not a bad thing. You should love God, and I would imagine that should be the first emotion that comes to mind when you think of God. But to the extent you decide to rebel against him, fear would be a good emotion to choose at that point. And I think that much of the church today shies away from that because we have very negative associations with fear. And that's fair. I understand why we do. Fear is mostly a bad thing. But sometimes it's a useful thing. Okay. Just checking on the stream. 1 moment. Okay. So we are going to try to run this back, switch to Immortal mode, which is the second highest difficulty level, but will be less impossible. We actually probably should switch to Small, even though I didn't want to do a bigger map, just because this way it'll allow us to have 4 religions that get founded, and we won't necessarily just get shut out of our victory condition right out the gate. So let's see. This is correct, and we will turn that on and get started. So right, same basic idea, but this time with less losing.
From the first stirrings of life beneath
I'm just
water
checking on the stream on
the
my,
great
on my
beasts
other
of the
view.
Stone Age.
How is the since there's
Man
only a
taking
couple of
his
you in here
first
right now?
upright
How is
steps,
the
you have come
audio
far.
right now?
Now
Can you hear
begins
me
your
okay? Can you
greatest
hear
quest.
this okay?
From this early cradle of civilization.
Basically, are
onwards
my
towards the stars.
words synced with
Embrace
what you
the-
were seeing? All of those types of things. Well, again, not the closest to the tundra. Okay, we're going to come up here. We can get this adjacency bonus from the tundra. If we were to plop a holy site like right here, that would be very good. This tile is a strong one. Oh, but yes, we will have access to the fresh water because we have a river there. So we'll go up here. Yeah, this is much better actually in terms of starting locations. And we have this food. So again, we're going to rush astrology because we want to get that holy site in order to go for the religious win. And And we're going to explore up top here with these tundras because those are very good spaces for Russia. And again, going for slingers so that we don't die immediately. The risk of that is slightly lower on immortal difficulty. So going back to the chat. Okay, cool. No new questions.
Our city.
So here we've discovered a city-state, and these can be helpful because if you get envoys to the city-states, then you can get them to allow you to be their suzerain, which is actually kind of something that interfaces with the Bible, interestingly enough. So suzerainty is a type of covenant where you have a leading entity and a vassal entity. So the suzerain is sort of the, if you want to say, the alpha, the leader, the higher power in that covenant, and the vassal is the secondary power, the subservient power in the relationship. And in a suzerainty covenant, traditionally, the suzerain would promise protection and essentially leadership over the vassal, and the vassal in exchange would promise some kind of oath, usually something pertaining to like obedience and fealty towards the suzerain. The reason this is cool is when Abraham gives his covenant to God in Genesis, he gives it in the style of an ancient suzerainty covenant. And if we were to become suzerains of Preslav here, which I don't know how to pronounce, but if we were to become their suzerains, it's essentially the same idea as the type of covenant that Abraham made with God. So just a very neat connection. There are a lot of little historical things that this game does well. Obviously, it's a video game, so a lot of it's silly and oversimplified, but it's still cool the way they tie in these elements. We're going to steal this worker, and then we're going to give it back. So we have 0 envoys, so it doesn't actually hurt our relationship with them if we declare war on them and then later reconcile, because we'll still be at 0. So we're going to... Ooh, I got to step over here first. Well, we're going to steal... There we go. That worker, and then try not to lose this unit and just run away. So we want to go up here, but this guy can do that exploration. He's going to come back this way. So probably this guy can come this way in terms of where he's exploring. So this is much better than last time. Last time when we were playing, we ran into Tomris immediately, which is one of the most aggressive and militaristically intimidating civilizations in this game. Brazil, so Pedro III, or second rather, is not quite as much bad news. He's sort of middle of the pack, if anything slightly on the friendly side of things. By the way, for anyone new watching, sort of the way this works is I more or less just want to answer Bible questions. I'm a seminary student. I know a thing or two about it. I like talking about it, and I try not to be hyper-conservative and have some of the problems that I feel like some teachers have about it today. Not to say I'm hyper-liberal either. I am middle of the pack. So if you have any questions, then I'd be happy to answer them. And in the meantime, I'm going to play Civ 6 because I like Civ 6. What we want right now is we want a settler, which we can't build because we're 1 turn away from getting more growth. So we either want a slinger to protect us and to also sort of explore this area, or we want a scout, which will also explore, but slinger is probably better just for defensive purposes, or the builder would be good as well. I'm really torn between the builder and the slinger here. If we were on deity difficulty, we moved, I know it says deity in the title, we moved down to immortal because I haven't played in a while and I've beaten deity in the past, but I was getting my butt handed to me. I would go for slinger for defensive purposes on deity difficulty, but because we've only met Pedro next to us and we're not on deity, I think we can get greedy and go for the builder instead. So, anywho, Daisy. That's bad. I did not see him. So we're going to link these two up, and we are going to pillage so that we can get our health rebuilt. Can he get to us in 1 turn? Yes, he can. That's not good. We probably have to pillage anyway just to get the free health. And the next turn we'll retreat onto probably this mountain, because then we'll have a river between us and we'll have a defensive position. And hopefully we can just fortify from there and not die. And I wonder when it will let me make peace. I wonder if I can do it immediately. No, 7 turns. I very rarely declare war on the city-states. I'm not trying to conquer it or anything. I literally just wanted to steal its worker, so hopefully I don't lose my warrior doing so. Oh, wow, he is already mad. That's not a good sign for me saying that he's going to be nice to us. So the way... Wow, that's not good. This was a bad plan. The way these relationships work is they each have this first one that he likes civilizations not competing for great people, and they have a hidden agenda. The fact that he's already mad at us means that we're violating whatever his hidden agenda is, which I don't know what his hidden agenda is. But whatever it is, we're not doing it. Is this a hill? I don't think it is. I think it's plains. Yeah, our warrior is hosed, which means we're going to lose this builder as well. So this was a mistake. I didn't see this guy. I think he was in the fog of war, like over here when I stole the worker. But probably the best way we can go to deal as much, I guess, to raise the likelihood of survival would be to go here, because if we're standing here, this guy can attack. If we go here, he can't reach us because he'd have to expend 2 movement points to get onto the hill. But because this is a grassland, we're still going to get shot by these walls, and then we're going to hit by him, and there's just no way we survive that. But we'll do our best. It is a little unfortunate that we're so close to the coast up here, just in terms of areas for expansion, and that we're already bumping into Brazil, because what I'm guessing is, since he's over here, that means he came from this direction, which means this would be the direction to expand, but there's a giant desert in the middle of that, and given the difficulty, I'd rather not have to rush for the desert base, for the Petra, which is how you make a decent city in the desert. So, a little unfortunate, because we probably have to go this way, but I don't love going that way because of the desert. Oh, there's a desert everywhere, apparently. Okay. We are going to rush either early empire or mysticism, depending on if we're going for these things. We probably aren't going oracle, because we don't want to make Pedro mad, because he likes to be able to focus on great people himself. But we do need these great profit points, specifically, in order to get a religion. So we'll probably go mysticism first anyway, and just plug that in. Oh, my mistake. I always do this. You can't plug this in until you have one of these governments. You can't place the purple government tiles. So we will go for early empire, then political philosophy, then get mysticism. And again, if anyone in the chat has any questions relating to Civ 6 or the Bible or anything else, just let me know. This, by the way, is the best Civ we could possibly run into on a religious victory, because he can't start his own religions, and he likes Civs very much if they spread their faith to him. So he is going to love us, because that is all that we're trying to do here. Actually, let's see if he'll let us send him. Darn. I was going to try to send a delegation, but he's not having it yet. So that's good. Right, as I was saying, things that I can answer questions about is literally just anything you have a question about, I can try. I mean, I'm not always the smartest guy, but boy, can I make an effort. I am an attorney, unfortunately, so I can answer some questions in that regard. I do patents, so technology stuff I know a thing or two about, and I'm a seminary student, so those are the areas where I know things, but as an overconfident person, I am happy to opine on just about anything, whether or not I know about it, because that is the American way. Okay, so we have the Congo probably over here. We have Brazil here. That seems good, because it seems like they're, unless he's like right here, they're closer to each other than they are to me, which is great, because we have all this space. We probably want to settle forward a little bit, to make sure that we're not just getting like caught up in this corner, which is a risk. But overall, things look pretty good. I am getting called by someone, and I would answer the phone, but my phone is also my my phone is also my camera, so I cannot answer that. The reason why I'm commenting on it is I think the person calling me is watching the stream right now. Hi, Jace. So whatever you have to say, either text Michelle and she'll come tell me, or tell me in the chat. Yeah. Anyway, So we have Rio over here. Well, we probably don't need to worry too much about this barbarian outpost because it seems like the city-state and also the Congo, and also it's right next to Brazil. We'll take care of it. And we don't want to go too far from our home base with all of our military units. We already are going a little further than I would generally prefer. But, okay, we need to get animal husbandry so that we can get these cows. Otherwise, building a farm here would be nice to get that for production. Is this on a hill? Yes, it is. This would be a great place to have a mine eventually. So we'll get mining once we have animal husbandry. But in the meantime, we'll start down here with a farm. And make sure that we are producing. Yeah, okay. So fantastic that we got Dance of the Aurora up here. That's going to make these holy sites that are up near these tundras really, really strong. Just making sure that I'm able to see the comments on the right side. I believe I am. I don't think it's giving me any issues. I will test that though. Okay, yes, it is scrolling all the way down. Oh, no, I am getting comments. I just wasn't seeing it. For some reason it froze and wasn't scrolling down. I apologize. So it says, hey man, I do have a question from Stanley. Jay said, drop the question for us. Questions are fun. Stanley said, basically trying to flatten out any differences that God made in mankind. I do. So my wife actually just came in and was asking me if I could see those comments. No, it wasn't scrolling down when people were commenting. When I wrote the word testing on my side account, that made it scroll down. So now I can see it. Sorry about that, Stanley. Basically trying to flatten out any differences that God made in mankind. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is neither male nor female. For you all are all one in Christ Jesus. Could you help me understand the verse in context? Absolutely. So there are a couple of different ways to understand that passage. But in order to kind of get to what it's talking about in the first place, I think we need to try to get into the mindset of a first century Jew, a first century Hebrew person, because that is the people who wrote the Bible. I don't know if you know this, but of the 66 books in Scripture, 2 of them were not written by Jews. And those 2 were both written by a gentleman named Luke, who wrote Luke and Acts. And he was a compatriot of Paul, who was just about the most Jewish Jew you'd ever meet. And most of what he's writing is from Paul's perspective. So, I mean, not in Luke, but especially in Acts. So the Bible as a text is a deeply, deeply Jewish work that has Gentile influences, that is non-Jewish influences, and that has a life of its own through the message that's given in the New Testament. But it's something that should be understood through the lens of a first century Jew, because that was the original audience for the most part. So essentially, in the first century, you had these Jewish people who were living in Israel, although they were not an independent nation. They were living under the boot of Rome, so to speak. They had kind of a puppet king named Herod, and they were not fans of the Romans, as one would imagine. People do not usually like the people who were occupying them. And at this point, they had been alternating between various nations conquering them for several hundred years. You had Assyria, who conquered the northern 10 tribes of Israel. Then you had Babylon, which conquered the southern 2, the rest of Israel, what was then called Judah. Then you had Persia, which took over Babylon and controlled Israel, and was nicer to them, but was still occupying them. And then you had Greece, specifically the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, and then you had Rome. So the point of all of that, and I know this sounds like I'm going away from the topic, but the point of that is they were very frustrated, understandably, with non-Jewish people. Gentiles were not popular groups to the Jews. When you hear a person, a very conservative Christian, say, we shouldn't do insert practice because it's pagan. For example, some will argue, Easter's pagan, Christmas is pagan. I don't think those things, but in any case, you'll hear them say that. That sort of disdain for people, for a view outside of their faith, is how Gentiles were viewed to the early Jews. So they would have thought that pagan people were godless, sexually immoral, hedonistic people who were just totally debaucherous and away from the ways of God, and for the most part shouldn't even be associated with, right? As a matter of just practicality, you might have to associate with them, but they weren't going to like it very much. There was a lot of prejudice against Gentiles. And a lot of that comes from the fact that in the Old Testament, God is setting apart Israel from the ways of the world and is giving them a unique kingdom that was different from the other empires of the world, right? Ancient Israel was supposed to be, quote unquote, a city on a hill, because literally Jerusalem, Zion, was on a hill, and was supposed to be a model for the surrounding nations of how to live in accordance with God's ways and be different from them. So some of this idea that we're going to be different from the people around us, came from a place that is reasonably rooted in the Old Testament and is not a bad thing. But a lot of it is just good old-fashioned prejudice and hate, and that part's not good and is not biblical. So, in this background, where you have these Jewish people who were very, very much not fans of the surrounding Gentiles, you have prophecies being made by people like Jeremiah and Isaiah that are talking about how in the future, the God of Israel, Yahweh, is going to become the God of the entire world. So he's going to become the God to the Gentiles as well. And when that promise is made, I mean, the original Jewish audience might have been somewhat actually hesitant toward allowing them into God's kingdom, but on top of that, interpret it largely as we're going to conquer them. And once we conquer them, we're going to make them like us. That's how many early Jews thought that was intended. Then Jesus, the Messiah, the fulfillment of those promises actually comes in the first century, and I'm sure you know the story of what Jesus did. And in the end, he lived a very servant-like life, which obviously an eternal life, but as far as his life on earth goes, a very servant-like life, and didn't conquer those people at all. And it turned out the kingdom he was talking about, perhaps there's a future fulfillment that may have political aspects. I don't want to get into that sort of eschatology and debate about Revelation, but at least right now, the application of kingdom is a spiritual kingdom. It is not conquering all of the Gentiles so that Israel can be the one true nation. That is not how the Gentiles are being given communion with God. Instead, even though we might be citizens of the United States, or they might be citizens of Rome, or whatever, we are all made citizens of heaven through the fact that we have put our faith in Christ, and we have been baptized, and we have joined the church, capital C church, the universal church. And in that way, we can put our identity as one of being God's people rather than our national identity. This idea was pretty revolutionary for the time. People's identities were very closely tied to where they were from. And so when Paul is writing, he is telling the early church that these Gentiles don't have to conform to Jewish practices in order to join the church. So for example, the book of Galatians, which is where you're quoting from, is about a debate between the Judaizers in the church at Galatia and between Paul, right? So the Judaizers were saying if you wanted to join the church, then whether you were a Jew or Gentile, you had to follow all of the Old Testament laws. You had to basically become a Jew, and then in addition to being Jewish, you could follow in the ways of this Christ guy. That was the idea of the Judaizers. It was very, very Jewish in terms of what was the goal of the exercise. You were supposed to be following all 600 and I'm blanking the number, something like 613 commands that they had counted out in the Torah, in the first 5 books of the Bible. Had to do all that if you're going to be Christian. Paul disagreed with them very strongly, to the extent that he nicknamed them the cutters because he thought they were so obsessed with circumcision. And he literally says, this is in the Bible, this is in Galatians, essentially, if they love circumcision so much, quote, I wish they would go the whole way and emasculate themselves, which there is not a feistier phrase in all of Scripture, I think, than that. So what Paul is saying when he carries on to say the verse you said, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for all are one in Christ Jesus, is that we have all of these different identities of the world that we use to break people into tiers. You know, Jews are better than Gentiles, and in the mind of the early church, free is better than slave, and men are better than women. Obviously, as a Christian, I do not agree with that, and I don't think Paul is agreeing with that either. But he's saying those divisions don't exist in the church in a practical way. Now, technically speaking, he wasn't saying anyone who is a slave, for example, in the first century, you're now free, you can go. I imagine Paul would have liked that very much. But from a practical perspective, there's a lot of teaching in the Bible, including Paul's teachings, about submitting to worldly authorities. Not in the sense that you're submitting your faith, you still stay strong in your faith, but as an example of the way Christ submitted on the cross, you submit to those earthly authorities. So you still have people who are having to live as slaves in a worldly sense, but in the church, they are not counted as less than the free people. right? And in the same way, those who were Gentiles were not counted as distinct from Jews. It's not like you shouldn't sit separately from them, which is something Peter did. And then Paul writes in Galatians, another feisty line, this is why I love Galatians. He says, I opposed Peter to his face, for he stood condemned, because Peter didn't want to eat with the Gentiles. So it is saying that Jews and Gentiles have become one person, or one people group, rather than a divided people group. And on top of that, the Gentiles are not obligated to adopt Jewish practices in order to become part of the church. Sorry for a very long-winded answer. Okay, you elaborated. You said also basically Paul's point is that the law which separated you from Gentile is no longer in effect with the coming of the Messiah. I would agree with that. One thing I want to touch on, and this is a very deep topic that I can't really go over in a short amount of time, but when Jesus says, for example, that he came to fulfill the law, and he also says things like, not one dot, not one tittle or iota of the law will pass away. What that means, in my view, is that the point of the law is to lead people to God. The Holy Spirit does that in a way that the law could never do. We should still very much read the law because, for example, if you read Psalm 1 talks about how the righteous man, it says meditates on the word of God, on the law of the Lord, which is literally, if you translate it more directly, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible of Yahweh. We should still very much have a very high place in our hearts for seeing the way God interfaced with the ancient Hebrew people through his word and through the law. And in that respect, the law is very much not dead. It is something that we should be studying, something that we should see God through. And to the extent it can be applied in love today, we should do that. But Jesus also said that we should love our neighbor as ourselves and love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And those are the top 2 laws in the other order. God first, neighbor second. And so if you look at that, in addition to the way Jesus as Lord of the Sabbath, that's the phrase he used, did things like not directly verbatim obeying the way at least the Pharisees, the religious leaders, saw the Sabbath laws. My view is that, yes, there is no obligation for Christians to follow Old Testament laws at all. I don't even see us as having an obligation to follow the 10 Commandments, although I do think we have an obligation to follow what's called the law of liberty that James talks about in the book of James. And that is essentially just New Testament teachings on how to love God and how to love your neighbor. Unsurprisingly, that teaching generally aligns with the Old Testament because the Old Testament's by God and the New Testament's by God. The difference, though, is a lot of context. So, for example, one great example is the not eating of pork. There's no point, really, in not eating pork in the modern day because we're trying to make the world one, and not eating pork was a way to separate Israel out from the surrounding nations and make them seem unique. And also there were dietary safety things because preparing pork wrong can make you sick. In the Old Testament, it made sense because we were trying to make Israel a unique example to the world and different from the world. In the New Testament, there is still that element, but trying to do so through dietary laws is more likely to cause division in that context than it is to cause unity. And so, for that reason, I don't think we're obligated to obey those laws. But we should still look to them to get an example of what God's will is in general. This is why a lot of people look for New Testament precedent when they're deciding whether or not an Old Testament law is binding. So here, when I say it's probably not binding, I'm looking at the statements by God to Peter when Peter gets a vision of unclean foods descending down to him, and God says, "Rise and eat," and Peter says, "I would never eat something unclean," and God says, "No, you're going to rise and eat, do it anyway." Some people interpret all of this differently. There's a wide breadth of Christian thought on this subject. But yes, I think you worded it pretty well, very well, that Paul's point is that the law separating Jew from Gentile is no longer in effect with the coming of Messiah. Yes, I agree. Again, that doesn't mean we have no law. It just means that the point is faith. We are not saved by that law, and our central focus should not be that law. That law is a way to grow closer in faith and unity to God. Young Slug Studios, I am coming back to you in just 1 second, but I want to answer Stanley's follow-up question first. So forcing Gentiles to be circumcised, not eat pork, etc. is a serious sin. Yes, I would say so. I would say if you feel led to be circumcised, if you feel led to do things like abstaining from pork, the New Testament gives you liberty to do that. There are some cases where restraining yourself in access to what God has made you be restrained to can be a thing that can bring you closer to God in whatever way. Fasting is an example of this, just not eating for a little while, not to the point where it's unsafe for you, but taking time, depriving yourself of food so you can focus on your faith, or setting restrictions like I'm not going to eat pork. Anything like that can be good, but if other people say you can't be saved unless you do this, then they are essentially, as Paul said, crucifying Christ anew by adding law onto what Christ's sacrifice has done through faith. So, yes, I agree with you. And of course, thank you for asking. So, Young Slug Studios now, hopefully you're still here. Sorry I took so long to get to your question. Said, opinion on God commanding Moses and the Israelites to slaughter the people living in the promised land. Okay, so we need a whole lot of context here if we're going to tackle this question, because it's an extremely nuanced and important and good question. So, in the context of the Old Testament, when we're talking about the ancient Hebrew people conquering the Promised Land, and specifically here we're talking about, at this point when they're doing the conquering, Moses has passed away and he's been succeeded by Joshua, Caleb, that generation. So when they were conquering those areas, the standard morality of that people group was not similar to something we see anywhere in the world today. For example, they had a god named Molech, and what these people of Canaan would do is they would take infants, and these altars to Molech were made out of metal, and they had the hands out like this. They would heat up with a fire underneath those metal hands, until they were just incredibly, incredibly hot, just metal that's been right above a fire for a long time. And they would, I'm sorry to be gruesome here, but it's important, you can't answer this question without really understanding how severe the context is. They would set infants onto the hands of that statue to Molech and melt them to sacrifice them to Molech, melt infants. That's very bad. I don't think I need to tell you that. I think you understand the severity of that kind of action. They also would have these worship ceremonies to pagan gods where they would engage in sexual acts in very large groups with cutting of their flesh involved in the process as a form of worship. This is very bad. And so, in that time, the long-term sort of goal of God in that era was to establish his people Israel, who are going to be a light to that area, who are going to be different from the surrounding people groups, and we're going to try to sort of, in a sense, get past the sin that had overwhelmed the world and create some measure of unity between God and man, right? And in order to do that, they had to, A, carve out a space in the land, and B, try to prevent those cultural practices of the surrounding areas, like sacrificing babies, from becoming a thing that the Israelites did. That second one doesn't go very well because people are not cooperative with God on these things. And God gives us free will, and so people have the ability to disobey God. And so, when you see God commanding them to destroy these people groups, I have a few comments on that. Number one, New Testament teachings, and even plenty of other places in the Old Testament, give lots of generally pacifistic commands to God's followers. So as a general rule, it is undoubtable, even in the Old Testament, that we are not supposed to go around committing genocide. That is bad. Also, as a general rule, we are supposed to love our neighbor even if our neighbors are Gentiles. There's lots of stuff, again, like in Jeremiah and Isaiah, talking about how the Gentiles were going to become one with God's people. And you see examples of Gentiles converting to Judaism and being great people in the Old Testament, like, for example, Rahab, the woman in the book of Joshua who let the spies in through the wall, or Ruth in the book of Ruth, who was faithful to her mother-in-law Naomi, and who married Boaz, and was a great woman despite overcoming some ancient Hebrew stereotypes about Moabites at the time, because she was from Moab. In any event, the point is, the general thrust of the Bible is against ideas like committing genocide against Canaanites. So why does Joshua talk about God commanding them committing genocide against Canaanites? Couple schools of thought. One view is that essentially he didn't, and we should what I call hermeneutical calisthenics, which is a fancy way of reading around the text as hard as we can, and just stretching the text over and over and over to get it to say what we want, until we can conclude that God didn't tell them to do that. Obviously, by the tone I'm using, I don't think that's a proper way to read the text. I think your observation that he was in fact telling them to conquer those areas and to kill those people is a correct one, and one that we need to grapple with. So, why did he do that? I would say, first off, if I were to guess, and I am guessing at the motivations of God here, that if he were to not do that, the total negative on human life would have been worse in that region than him telling them to do that. And the reason I'm saying that is things like those very repulsive worship practices of essentially having orgies, and I'm, again, sorry to use such harsh wording, while cutting themselves. That kind of thing's not good for people. Neither is sacrificing infants by melting them on statues. The types of practices of those peoples were terrible, and also militaristically, they would do what the Jews did and worse. I mean, they would conquer cities, they would kill every single person inside, they would take... One thing the Assyrians like to do is they would take their heads and put them on spikes and surround the whole city with those spikes. It was bad. And so I think most likely that without just controlling the will of man and saying, you know what, y'all aren't going to do your own thing, God's in charge now, and God's going to literally overwhelm your will, take away free will, and fix it. Short of that, my guess is that the best option was to wipe out that culture, and this was the only way available to do it. Again, without overriding free will. That's my guess. The Bible doesn't tell us that. It is an educated guess. The second thing I would have to say about it is there is a very big difference between a person killing someone and God killing someone. And I know this is going to sound callous, and I'm to an extent sorry for that, but at the end of the day, people don't have a right to, as in general, I mean, you can make exceptions for like wartime or for punishing criminals. There's debate on those subjects. I'm not talking about that. But as a general rule, people don't have the right to kill people. We are made in the image of God, and you don't have the right to murder, right? God, on the other hand, is the one who gives humans life, and on top of that, he is rightfully the judge of humans. He doesn't kill people who have done nothing wrong, ever. I don't believe God would do that. That would be unjust. But to people who are deserving death, God is willing to kill them. And I struggle to... intuitively, I don't like that. Because, A, I'm a person, and I don't like it when God kills people. And B, I just like the mercy of God a lot more than the judgment of God. That sounds more pleasant. But I can't say it's morally wrong for God to take someone who deserves death and to kill them. He is the judge. It is similar to a person who is on death row, who has earned death, being killed by the judge. Not directly by the hand of the judge in this case, they'd have an executioner, but you get the idea. It's not an unjust process when God commands the death of people who deserve death. Is it uncomfortable? Deeply so. And I am very grateful that in the New Testament we have the sacrifice of Christ that can bring unity of God's people, and through his Holy Spirit can cause people to change and turn away from their sinful ways without resorting to the types of things we see in places like Joshua. Again, there's a lot of thought on this subject. I've given you one perspective, and tons of people will disagree with me and have different schools of thought on it. Tons of faithful Christians would say that my condoning God's actions, or the way that God's actions are being interpreted, is not acceptable, and that the true God would never do that, and it's evidencing that I'm misinterpreting the passage, and really God didn't command such a terrible thing as I think the text says he did. So maybe you end up on that side of the camp, and if you do, that's okay. There's room for disagreement and for multiple views on that passage. But just to summarize again, God has the right to give and take life. Those people were really, really bad and deserve to die, but in fairness, I also, and any person who's committed sin deserves to die, but their sins were really unique in how extreme they were and how bad they were for the surrounding people. And there's a very strong argument that life got better for the inhabitants of that land after those things happened as a direct result of wiping out parts of that culture. That culture wasn't wiped out entirely because King Saul declined to follow God's commands, and lots of bad things happened as a result. But in essence, like all of God's commands, I believe it was good, even if that's difficult to see in this context. So thank you for the question, and I'm sorry to go on for so long. I'm not sure if there have not been more I'm going to do a second test. Oh, there we go. We are getting more comments showing. Good. I was making sure it wasn't not scrolling down again. Okay. Jace always says, if I remember correctly, archaeological digs of Moloch worship included bones of kids upwards of 7 years old. Yep. Very bad. Young Slug said, thank you. I've seen many atheists say God is evil and malicious for his actions and instructions in the Old Testament. I've been trying to perfect a rebuttal of this argument for a while. Yeah, it's hard. And if you use mine, then you haven't perfected it, because I certainly haven't. But it's the best that I can do with it. I think it's a very difficult topic, and I think people who just kind of like set it to the side and ignore it are doing a disservice to it. I mean, Israel means wrestles with God. I think it's not a bad thing, but a good thing when you see a difficult part of Scripture and you engage with it and wrestle with it and sort of, fight with yourself over to try to piece through it. So it's a worthwhile pursuit. Jace always says, I think that Morty Solomon, that's the guy who does the Bema podcast, B-E-M-A, if you want to check it out. It's a good podcast. I haven't listened to it much, but I know my friend Jace has, and he's told me it's very good, and I trust him on it. So anyway, I think that Morty Solomon does a nice job of this topic in the Bema podcast. There it is. I just hadn't read ahead. As well, though he does engage a bit more hermeneutical calisthenics. Yeah, some people do that, and maybe they're right, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I mean, give me grace where God has not revealed these things in greater detail, because there isn't a secondary divinely inspired commentary next to Joshua to help us interpret it. It just tells us what happened, and then we're on our own past that point. Michelle Hankelman says, you skipped my question. Oh, sorry about that. What are the big takeaways from 1st and 2nd Corinthians? I'm going to be honest with you. It has been forever since I have done a Bible study of Corinthians. You could ask me about most of Paul's writings, and I could tell you the central gists of them pretty competently. Corinthians, though, I think I would be doing you a disservice if I tried to do that. So, what we are going to do is we're going to look it up, because I would rather do that than just lie to you. Hopefully this outline isn't in a ton of detail. That is way too much detail. Okay, I will point you in the right direction, because I don't want to take too long here on something that I haven't researched recently enough to give a good answer for. If I were trying to answer this question, what I would do is I would go to the Bible Project by Tim Mackey. He does amazing videos on this. So you would go to YouTube, you type in Bible Project 1 Corinthians, 1 Corinthians, but just typing it out, it's a 1. I say that because there's a video where Trump says to 2 Corinthians, and he says it 2 Corinthians, not as a typing thing, but as in he thought that was what it said, which I find amusing. Anyway, so yeah, you would go to the summary, and then you'd watch the one for 2 Corinthians, and he does an amazing job summarizing these things, far better than I could. They're pretty short. This one's 8 minutes, so if you want to put it on double speed, it'll take you 4 minutes, and it'll give you a great answer to the question. So, sorry I wasn't intellectually prepared for that one. I, again, haven't read Corinthians in a while. And also, sorry for skipping your question. It was not intentional. I got carried away with the very good other questions that were being asked. Having said that, I haven't played Civ much so far, so at some point I should probably do that. The question here is, do we go for Stonehenge to get a great profit, or do we just go for these great profit points to eventually work towards one? Stonehenge gives us the advantage of +2 faith per turn. Besides that, it does nothing. Besides giving us the great profit, but you're going to get one eventually through shrines anyway. So I think we need a settler really bad soon, so I think we probably go shrine then settler, because that'll get us there faster than Stonehenge. And then once we do a settler, we'll immediately make a second holy site up here, and then go for more shrines to try to get those great profit points. So we are still at war with Preslav because we tried to take their builder and lost that particular fight. We can make peace in a turn. I'm not even going to bother shooting the guy because I don't actually want their military to be weaker. I'm quite happy with them keeping their units. I just wanted to steal their dude and failed to do so. He's going to keep chasing me. Okay, now we can make peace.
I am fond of pigs.
So, there we go. That particular mistake is done and dealt with. Clicking into the chat again to make sure it scrolls down, and we are indeed at the bottom. I am going a little far from my main area with these units, and I'm not going to be able really to have the flexibility to build more for a while because I need that settler. So we're going to kind of roundabout and come back with both of them just after we explore a tiny bit more. It's good though that we've just found we need to find a full path to the cities so that we can make trade routes and that sort of thing with these nations. I'm getting a call from my lovely wife who, you know what, this one seems worth answering despite the fact we're streaming with this phone. Oh, hey, I can answer it with it not closing it. That's good. Hi, Michelle. You're live.
You're not at the bottom.
I'm not at the bottom? Oh, thank you for saying that. It's so annoying it keeps doing that. Wow. She hung up on me. Okay. She goes, knew you'd say that. And then Jay said, is the Book of Job a parallel or a history book or something in between? I will tell, or parable or a history book or something in between. I will tell you this, to the original author, it was not intended as a history book. That isn't to say it's ahistorical. That would be a different thing than what I am saying. So please listen with nuance because it's a nuanced topic. Okay, let me just elaborate on that. So the way the Book of Job is laid out is it is a massive epic poem describing the events that occurred regarding the life of this fellow named Job, right? And in this very epic poem, you have these long poetic speeches by Job, by Job's friends, and by God. And by the other fellow who shows up, the younger man. I'm forgetting his name just before God speaks. It might be Elihu. It's something to that effect. In any case, it being in that poetic structure makes me think that it wasn't written with the goal being in mind of it going, okay, so you understand the history of the man named Job. First this happened, then that happened, then that happened, then that happened. It's not meant as a narrative like that. There are poetic points being made that aren't going to be understood unless you engage with it the way you would poetry. That is, by looking for things like parallelism in the word choice, and looking for things like poetic structure, and so on and so forth that you wouldn't look for in a narrative. So, does that mean that it's ahistorical? Not necessarily. It is possible that there was a literal man named Job who went through the literal things that are described in the Book of Job, and that would take nothing away from the book if it were literal, nor would it take anything away from the book if it were not literal. A lot of people will debate this and will say, well, if it didn't literally happen, then the Bible's lying, and then it's not the Word of God, and so we must conclude that it did literally occur. That's true when the text is a narrative, is a historical narrative. So, for example, if you tell me that the events of Joshua and the events of Judges and the events of 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles and 1st and 2nd Samuel, not in that order, but you get the idea, and Ezra and Nehemiah and every other historical narrative book of the Bible, that those are ahistorical, that is a very serious claim. That if they're ahistorical, they're not doing what the book was made to do, which would mean then the Bible's, in my opinion, and at least the way I conceive of it to be, not inspired, and that would be a much bigger deal. Conversely, if you say that of the Book of Job, which is a big poem, and you say, hey, turns out this poem isn't writing about historical events, it's a parable. It's supposed to teach us a lesson about how to deal with suffering. That doesn't change the meaning of the book at all. The meaning of the book is, here's an example of the life of a man written out in beautiful, very in-depth poetry as to how you should engage with suffering from God and the problem of evil. Why are bad things happening to good people? If there's an all-powerful God who's all good, why does evil exist at all? It's incredibly useful and inspired and perfect for that purpose, but whether or not it's historical plays no role whatsoever in how I would interpret the book. So frankly, I don't care if it's historical. A lot of people have argued a lot about this, killed a lot of trees writing papers on it, and to the extent they care, Godspeed, and I'm glad that they have a passion for such things. But it really doesn't affect the meaning of the book at all. I don't know. I don't think the book gives us anything to really indicate its historicity one way or the other, but I also think it doesn't matter. Hopefully that answers your question. As for whether it's a parable, to the extent you're meaning parable as a story that is meant to teach us a lesson, it is actually absolutely a poetic parable in the same sense that Jonah is. If you mean parable as in a historical, a fictional story meant to teach us a lesson, I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Who knows? It doesn't say. Good night, Lungstug. Have a good night. Thanks for joining us for a bit. And that message moved my chat, so I actually got to see it was at the bottom. I'm not sure why it's not updating generally, but that one did, so that's good. Jay says, what about the life of Abraham? We're about to get into things we might disagree on. I'm not 100% sure. Jay says, there's clear poetic structure in his entire life, so does that mean it isn't, quote, required to be history? I am always tempted in moments like this to pretend that I know more than I do. Because my instinct is to go, why yes, well, even though there are poetic elements to the story. But the fact of the matter is, I was aware of poetic elements for Genesis 1 through 11 right before Abraham's life. I wasn't aware there was poetry for Genesis 12 through 50, which is Abraham plus descendants, part of Genesis. So I didn't even realize that. I do think it's probably, it's more, the historicity of it is more central to the text in that context because of the ways in which the end of Genesis interfaces with the beginning of Exodus, and the way that it sets up the life of Moses, and the way that you see, where did the Levites come from? Well, they came from a fellow named Levi, who was the son of Jacob, who was the son of Isaac, who was the son of Abraham. Those types of fundamental sort of creation of the Hebrew people, and I can see you're going to 1 through 11 right now. Anyway, we're going to skip that until you ask the question. Those types of seemingly historical events, and also the way the narrative is laid out as event, rather than in Job, where it's poetic speech, makes me think the point is more likely to be historical. And, we see a lot of references to the patristic fathers, to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and also the 12 tribes, their namesakes. We see a lot of reference to them in the rest of the Bible that really don't seem to be interpreting it as parable. So there I would say it's much more likely to be actual history, and I always have interpreted it as real history, and I really suspect that's probably correct. But in the event that I am wrong, and it's not historical, I'm not gonna, if I get to heaven one day and God says, Brad, you were wrong, it's not historical, that part, I'm not gonna sit there and go, well, that means the whole book's wrong, God, what have you done? No. To me, in my limited humanity, I would think that would take something away from Genesis 12 through 50, which is why I'm inclined to say it's probably historical, but I'm capable of being wrong. So again, this is something where I would say there's room for liberty and disagreement on both sides, but I think the evidence from where I'm sitting at in terms of what the text was intended to be interpreted as seems to point towards it being historical, unlike Job. But I didn't even know about the poetry thing, so maybe I'm wrong. So hopefully I am getting my chat updated still, because I wasn't before. I'm just going to keep annoyingly writing the word test every once in a while, because apparently that's the only way to make the thing scroll to the bottom. Oh no, I wasn't getting the message. It says, for what it's worth, it seems like it's history told through a lens of oral tradition. I agree. The text itself tells you it's that, because, and you know this, by the way, so I'm not saying this from the perspective of my friend Jace wouldn't know this. Jace is a brilliant man who knows the Bible very well. Because Moses is credited as being the author of the Torah, which, by the way, he didn't write the whole Torah. Not going to get into that. But it talks about Moses' death and calls him the most humble man in the world. So obviously it doesn't mean he wrote every word of it, at least from my perspective. But with Moses being credited as the author of the Torah, it wouldn't make sense for Genesis, which is long before Moses was born, being something that Moses wrote without the benefit of oral tradition. Whoever wrote it, most likely, at least with Moses being a major player in that writing, but not the sole player in that writing, whoever wrote it definitely was inheriting oral tradition of one kind or another. And in that context, the poetry might actually be being used to make it more easy to remember. Poetry is very often used that way, as songs are used today to help us remember things. I still remember songs about, all the helping verbs in my English class, helping verbs, there are 23. Songs and poems are handy for that sort of mnemonic device. Jay Salloway says, it's kind of weird that Moses and there's something covering the word there. I'm guessing it's Elijah. Yes, it is. Show up at the Transfiguration instead of Abraham. we talked about this in person yesterday, so thank you for setting me up for something that you know I have thoughts on. That is kind of you, but I am not going to take this without admitting that you are in fact setting me up intentionally for something I'm capable of talking about. So thanks. We'll go writing. So yes, for those who aren't immediately familiar with the story, there is a part in the Gospels, in the New Testament, the stories of Jesus' life, where Jesus goes up on a mountain and the transfiguration occurs. He is glorified. He is glorified on that mountain, and Peter, James, and John witness this glorification of Christ. And while he is up there, he speaks with Moses and Elijah. And to me, of everyone you could pick in the Old Testament, there are reasons I could see why you would pick Moses and Elijah to be the two he talks to, but they wouldn't have been my first choice. Not the most intuitive selection. I would have thought Abraham, David, Moses and Elijah are super important, especially Moses, but David is like, the king who is the best king in all of Israel and is perhaps the most famous, father of the Israeli people, alongside Abraham being the one from whom all of Israel came. So like those would have been the two I would have picked, but luckily I'm not God, so God picked better. So why then was it Moses and Elijah up there? My thought on it is that during the lives of Moses and Elijah, those are the only two people in the entirety of the Bible who went up on a mountain and spoke face-to-face with God. Or I should say the Old Testament at least, because I suppose technically Peter, James, and John did that by talking to Jesus on the mountain. But in any case, those are the only two Old Testament figures who went on a mountain and spoke face-to-face with God. And then when you see in the New Testament that Jesus is speaking face-to-face with Moses and Elijah, the specific two people who spoke face-to-face with God on a mountain, and he's doing it on a mountain, that makes me think it's an intentional callback to those events. I think that it's possible, and this gets into some timesy-wimesy things that we are guessing about, but it is possible that what Peter, James, and John are seeing is the occurrence of that original conversation between Moses and God being Jesus, actually, because Jesus is God, and Elijah talking to God on the mountain. That essentially it is bending back the fabric of time itself so that they can see these events occur, and they can see that Jesus is, in fact, God, because they would know these stories, and they would know if that's the person that Moses and Elijah spoke to, that's God. I think that's very possible. On top of that, I would add there's an element of it being law and prophets, Moses being the writer of the Torah, the writer of the law, and Elijah being one of the three major prophets. Am I right about that? Elijah was an extremely significant prophet, but he didn't write any of the three major prophets' books. One moment. We're going to make sure I'm not... Yeah, no. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel are credited as three major prophets. In any case, Elijah was an extremely significant prophet, arguably the most significant prophet of the people of Israel, though he didn't write... Obviously, this is what I was alluding to. He didn't write a book. So... odd that he's not technically a major prophet in the sense of being grouped with those three, but he is still a major prophet in the sense of being perhaps the most significant prophet of all of Israel's history, short of, Jesus, of course. But Jesus wins in every category, so, doesn't feel fair to include him here. Okay, so we got the settler. We really do need another one, because we need to get these holy sites up in order to found a religion. And honestly, that should be the only priority here. Otherwise, we're just going to lose. Let's see. There was one religion founded, and it was founded via Stonehenge because it's not letting us build Stonehenge anymore. Which is good we didn't go for that, because he would have gotten to it before we would have. And then we would be very much, as they say, up a creek. I guess maybe I should have forward settled this to try to claim some of this land, but we'll do that with the second one. I'm going to test on the chat again to make sure I'm scrolling to the bottom, because I forgot to do that, and it doesn't like scrolling... Okay, good, we are at the bottom. It doesn't like scrolling down on its own for some reason, and we got a great profit, so that saves us a lot of concerns. And this may be an unpopular choice, but we're playing as Russia on a Christian live stream. And it feels morally wrong to make Protestantism the faith of the Russian people that we are spreading. And so in the interest of love and ecumenism and respecting Russian culture, we're going to go with Eastern Orthodoxy, despite the fact that I myself am a proud Protestant. So consider this an olive branch to any Eastern Orthodox folks in the who are watching, that we are going to be spreading that one today, even though, you know, ours is better. That's said tongue in cheek. Let's see. We want this is what we want, work ethic, because we have really good adjacency bonuses with faith, and this is going to give us production, which is going to make our cities just way, way, way better. The second one matters way less. We can get one of these ones that allows a building to be better. Those are fine. Or we could get one that helps based on number of followers. We should probably get one of those later, though, once we have bigger cities and more spread for our religion. These ones that help with spreading are also really, really strong. But again, that might be stronger later in the game once we're focusing on that aspect. Holy Order is very good. Yeah, I think we're going to start with one of these ones that allows you to build a different building that buffs your religious abilities in the game. We don't care about diplomatic favor. We're fine falling behind on science and religion because we're playing, or science and culture because we're playing as Russia. So we probably want to go synagogue, Daramir. I think synagogue's generally better. Gurdwara for the extra food. Mosque or stupa. Because we're not going to be at war much, stupa doesn't matter. So we probably want synagogue for the most faith, Gurdwara for the most population growth, or mosque for the extra missionary and apostle spread. Now, this is going to be a moment where none of these are our traditionally Christian buildings, so of course Christians didn't eat in synagogues for a while, so we're all going to close our eyes real tight as we pick mosque. Because it's the best option in the game, and it's a game. By the way, if you are in the chat, again, the purpose of this is to play Civ 6, have a good time, but mainly I am here to answer any questions you might have about the Bible or about anything else. Even if I'm not competent to speak on something, I am happy to do my best, because that's the American way, to answer things of which you do not know enough. Speaking somewhat tongue-in-cheek, I am a seminary student, so I know a little bit about the Bible, and I am an attorney, so I know a little bit about that, but that stuff's boring, so why would you ask about the law? But any topic's fine. I am having an issue where the chat doesn't always scroll down, which is why you'll see Brad Hinkleman test. That's my other YouTube account, writing the word test over and over so it scrolls down immediately. Sometimes it scrolls on its own, sometimes it doesn't. Hopefully we're at the bottom right now, but if you have a question and I'm ignoring you, it's because I don't see it, and I apologize. In the meantime, where do we want to build the city? Because we're Russia, we tend to have border growth really fast, which is nice. So we probably want to give a little space around our capital instead of just setting this up right next to it. That would lead me to put it somewhere around here, all along this river. We want to be close to these, this tundra area so we can get a good holy site, but we don't want to be sticking our city itself in the tundra, so probably a tile adjacent to the tundra. I would be inclined to go with this one because we have a good food tile, some productivity, we get horses that way, and we have a good spot for the holy site while staying adjacent to the river. So we'll put it on this stone over here.
Writing.
Okay, so we've pretty much covered all the areas near us. Because we're on a continents map, there have to be at least 2 continents. There are only 7 civs in the game, meaning there's at most 4 civs on this continent, meaning since we've spotted 2 more than us on this already, there's at most 1 more on the continent, and probably it's just us 3, which means this continent doesn't go very far down here. So we're going to stop exploring for the most part in order to bring back these guys and be able to take care of this barbarian encampment and be able to just defend our home base in case anything happens. Also, only having two slingers as the entire military prowess of our nation is bad. But luckily, there's no threat other than a single barbarian camp right now, and none of our cities are on the coast. So, really, in the early game, the most dangerous barbarians are the naval units that'll attack your cities, and those can't be a problem to us right now. And wow, I don't recall ever seeing +7 as an adjacency bonus. That is incredible and will be super crazy awesome once we are getting a production bonus from that, which will be immediately because we already got that aspect of the... oh wait, no, we would need to spread the faith over here to get that bonus. But in any case, that's good. Okay, we need to forward settle a little bit because we want to have 4 cities, and these guys are going to encroach on our land and make that hard. We probably just want to go here, simply because, I mean, here, here, or here, you know, around this line where we're not getting a loyalty pressure, in order to get the most land we can. I'm hesitant to go... I guess we could go here if we can get a city here. The only risk is if we don't get another city, then we're going to run into a big loyalty issue, where we could have the city flip if we go any further than this. But if I go for a second settler, I think it's okay here to build one here and then the other like here. And that way we have the loyalty good. Because the way loyalty works is if your cities are close together, they don't defect to the enemy nations. But if they're far apart, then they might. So let's look at these tiles. There's really nothing great down here. I'd only want it because I don't want to just have 2 cities. I do like this is a volcano and this is a volcano because when they erupt, they make the tiles around them better. And like this tile is great, but I don't see us being able to get that. It's too far away. So if we go over here, I kind of... it's really difficult. I kind of like this tile because at least then we're getting this and this and this, and those aren't terrible. It's not a great city, but it's fine. So we're going to go up here and do that. And then we have to be at least 4 away for the second one. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We can do something like over here, which again won't be a great city, but it's better than nothing. Okay. By the way, I've been assisted by my lovely wife, Michelle, and by my good friend Jace, who is another creator on this channel, who have mentioned a couple times when I'm not seeing things on the chat, just so they're aware, because they have my number. If you text me, I'll see it at the top of the screen. So if the same issue happens again where I'm not seeing things in the chat and you notice that, no need to like try to stake it out for me, but if you notice it, just text me and I'll get an alert on my phone. In any event. This is very bad. So when you see 3 units clustered together coming your direction like this, that means they're coming to murder you. Usually. So Brazil, our friends who we met and who I immediately went, oh, they're nice, they won't declare war on us. They're coming to declare war on us. And the settler was supposed to walk in the direct direction of where they're coming to kill us. And we have none of our military back here. So there's actually a word for this in the sphere of people who play Civilization very competitively, which I don't, but I follow some of this content from people who, you know, are basically professionals in this area. So the word for this situation is bad. This is bad. But hopefully we make it through. Okay, I never go for Victor, but I'm kind of tempted to because we're about to get clapped. But the other options would be Pingala or Moksha, or maybe Amani, but we probably need one that's going in a city. Jace Alloway says, knock knock question time to my...
It was luxuries like air conditioning that brought down the Roman Empire.
Phone.
With air
There it is, yep, didn't scroll down. What's the role of women in the New Testament church? Jace, you're mean. I say, Jace, you're mean, because he asked a very important and very good question. One that is divisive within the church, and I generally I don't like being divisive. Some people like that, some people don't. I'm on the don't side of it, which makes me unique among lawyers, I think. But anyway, I'm going to answer it anyway. So, first off, let's get production so that we don't all die a terrible death. Because that lets us build military units. We're going to link up here just so that we don't lose the settler. So, women's roles. First off, let's just cover the different positions there are on that subject and why those different positions exist. And then we can talk about which one's probably right. So, we'll just go with Moksha and put him in St. Petersburg to try to get Astrakhan, however you say that. Sorry, Russians. That was terrible, and I'm very sorry. Luckily, there's few enough people watching that the odds that anyone in here speaks Russian any better than I do, although I suppose that would be any level of speaking Russian. In any case, odds are low. So, women's roles. There are a lot of passages in the Bible. Hey, this guy's walking away. That's good. There are a lot of passages in the Bible that talk about things women should do within the church, even in the New Testament. In fact, it's more present within Paul's writings than anywhere else in the Bible. In those writings, the exhortation that Paul gives to women is incredibly conservative by modern standards. Loyalty pressure got much worse. We will set up shop over here so we aren't getting quite as pressured.
We are losing.
And we're going to have to move our governor over. Sorry for going so back and forth on this question between the game. Anyway, so those exhortations, things like in Ephesians 5, it talks about the roles for wives, slaves, and children. So slaves, obey your masters, wives, obey your husbands, children, obey your parents. Then it gives the reverse side for all of that. Parents do not, I forget the word it uses, but essentially don't be overly burdensome and frustrating towards your children. And masters, be good to your slaves, and husbands, love your wife. Love your wives, right? Individual, one wife per husband, but husbands plural, love your wives plural, as in one per each husband. So, in passages like that one, Paul gives an exhortation for wives to take on a very submissive posture. And so this is often interpreted by especially conservative readers of the Bible that Paul is saying exactly what he sounds like he's saying. And I don't think this is unreasonable, by the way, as an interpretation. That, when Paul didactically teaches that women should submit to their husbands, and that husbands should lead their wives, and that the church structure should follow that same basic structure, only only men can be elders, so on and so forth. Based off of the didactic teaching of Paul, meaning like him giving instruction and what those instructions say, I think that makes a ton of sense, and that's why a lot of people go that way. Personally, I don't, which is not popular in the groups that I find myself in, by the way. I am generally more conservative than average on this kind of thing. Not this kind of thing, on Christianity. Not politically conservative. I am religiously conservative. I am generally apolitical, not political. But in any case, most of my groups would take that very conservative stance where Paul says women submit, women should submit. That's the whole story. The complication to that perspective, the reason there is a discussion here, is not because people want that to be wrong. It is thought sometimes by the conservative folks that the reason we're arguing about it is because, we just don't like it and we want God to do things our way, so we complain. That's not the reason there's a debate. The reason there is a debate on this subject is because if you read the New Testament and you read Paul's exhortations to people within the early church, tons of the early leaders were women. So, for example, one thing that this conservative worldview would say is that only men can be deacons, because it says in 1 Timothy that, we read this today, in 1 Timothy that deacons likewise, the likewise being just as elders should be men of one wife. Man of one woman is a more direct translation. This was a common expression at the time. We see it on tombstones of ancient Jewish people. That essentially means that they should not be polygamists. They should be faithful to their wife, their singular wife, and they should not be chasing tail after other women, right? It is not an exhortation as to the literal marital status of the man, as in, if you are unmarried, you cannot be a deacon or an elder. That's not the point. That can't be the point, because Paul was unmarried, and Paul said that was better for following Christ in a leadership style way. He says in one of his epistles, if you're able to remain like I am and not be married and not, essentially chase after the desires of the flesh, that's even better, because then you can focus on God. It is impossible to imagine that Paul is saying church leaders can't be unmarried men. because Paul was the most important church leader of the early world as far as Gentiles go. Not that he was a Gentile, but towards the Gentiles. And Paul was unmarried. So when it says man of one woman, it can't possibly mean a married man is the only one who can be a church leader. Instead, and that carries not just to the marital status side, but to the man side of the statement, because you'll find in 1 Timothy, right after it says that, it said women likewise, when it's giving the descriptions for a deacon in this case. And by the way, conservative translations like the ESV, because the word for women and wife is the same in Greek, will change that translation. I say change, I'm being a little biased here. We'll translate that as their wives as well, instead of women likewise, in order to say not the deacons who are women, but the wives of the deacons. Anyway, so I don't think it's possible to interpret the command that elders and deacons have to be men of one wife as meaning they must be men and they must be married to one wife. I think instead of that, it is a common phrase of the time that means people who are faithful to a single partner, people who are not polygamist, right? People who are, again, faithful. Because if it doesn't mean that, then Paul's disqualifying himself, which seems wrong. My wife says I'm a squirrel when I talk. Thanks. So, beyond that, there's other things that would conflict with such a literalistic reading. For example, we have the exhortation of Paul to Phoebe, and I believe it's Romans 16:1, if I remember correctly. I might be wrong, but it's something like that, where Paul talks about Phoebe, a deacon at the church at Centre. Phoebe is a woman. If he's saying only men can be deacons, then exhorting Phoebe for being a really good deacon while she's a woman seems a little out of character for the guy who wrote the thing that purportedly says that women can't be deacons. The way conservatives will read around that passage is they will say, well, the word deacon in Greek is the same word as servant. And so when Paul says that Phoebe is a deacon at the church of Centre, he's saying she's a servant at the church of Centre. The trouble with that reading to me is that the way we would differentiate between when it means deacon and when it, as in the church office, and when it means servant is by looking at the context. So for example, if you said deacon and followed it with at the church, then it's probably referring to the church position. And I don't think Paul is such a poor writer that he would write deacon at a church and not mean a deacon at a church. So for that reason, I don't think the super simplistic reading that, well, it says here man of one woman, that means it must be a man with one wife. I think that's ignoring a lot of the competing factors that you see in Paul's writings where he exhorts people like Phoebe, who are a deacon. Other examples include Junia. Junia, Paul exhorts, and he calls her outstanding among the apostles. Now, again, conservative translators will argue that this doesn't mean that she was an outstanding apostle. It means that the apostles knew her and really liked her, so that she was well known to the apostles. She wasn't an apostle herself. The second argument they will make is that Junia was not, in fact, a woman, but it was Junias instead. The trouble with that is both those readings are frankly irresponsibly ahistorical, and I'm not trying to be overly critical. It's just that sometimes people get things wrong, and this is an example of that. You can make a similar argument, but the way that the majority of people on that side have made it, in my opinion, is too far incorrect to be reasonable. And the reason I say that is we have records, for example, tombstones, that give us an idea of names that were common in the region. There's no record of a single male Junias in that era at all. And virtually every manuscript and every commentary on it by the early church fathers, actually every single one except, we'll get to this, a mistranslation of Origen in the Middle Ages, renders her as a woman. And so it is terribly unreasonable to insist, well, no, it's actually Junias, and to say she was a man, because it's just anachronistic. The name didn't even exist for men at the time. And on top of that, we have church fathers like John Chrysostom, or John Chrysostom, I always forget how to pronounce his name, who was an early church father. I think he was in the 300s AD when he was writing. That was a weird way to say that, but you get what I meant. And when John Chrysostom talks about Junia specifically, you have to understand first, John Chrysostom was what we call a misogynist. He wrote a lot of really good things about the Bible. He was a faithful Christian, and I'm very grateful for his writings, but he also had some thoughts about women that I think are kind of bad. It was on the scale of like women, it's not just they can't be leaders, but women are inherently gullible people who should not be trusted with any sort of intellectual task. Appears to have been more or less John Chrysostom's thoughts on things. Nevertheless, when John Chrysostom gets the passage on Junia, as to whether she's an apostle or just known by the apostles, he says, "Consider Junia, how amazing she must have been to not only have been an apostle, but to be outstanding among the apostles." Now, if anyone has a motivation to interpret that passage as not meaning what he just said, it would be John Chrysostom, because he was not really high on women in general. But, nevertheless, he, a native speaker of Koine Greek, so like he's not learning Koine Greek in an academic setting and having to like figure out what these words mean. He spoke Koine Greek like 200 years after the New Testament was written, so very, on the grand scale of things, very close to its writings. We don't have native Koine Greek speakers anymore. We have native Greek speakers, but it's very different from that early era of Greek, or at least there are some significant differences. So we have an early speaker of Koine Greek who has motivation to read this as Junia is not a man or not an apostle, and even he says not only is she a woman and she's an apostle, she must have been a really great one. So yeah, for that reason, I mean, 2/3 of the early church was female. If you read extant writings about early church leaders, there are plenty of examples of wonderful Christian women, including martyrs, who were leaders in the church. I don't think we can read this as a simple exhortation that women cannot have leadership roles in the church. I do think the argument for only male elders is stronger by far than the argument for only male deacons, because we have a female deacon in the Bible, we don't have a female elder in the Bible. Having said that, we have 2 elders named in the Bible. Their names are James and Jesus. Those are the only 2, as far as I'm aware, that are named by name as being an elder. I suspect Paul would have counted as one at some churches he did work at over long periods of time, but it never calls him one. So we barely have examples of men being elders. We have no examples of Gentiles being elders. So if you're saying you have to have an example of a thing for it to be allowed, then like we only have Jesus and Peter count, or it was either Peter or James. I'm actually forgetting now, but one of the 2 calls himself an elder, and that's like the only example of the New Testament of a named elder. So point is, no, we don't have a woman named an elder, but we don't have a lot of men either. In any case, if you go to a church and they say only the men can be elders, only the men can be deacons, I don't think it's worth fighting over. I do think this is something where, we're called to submit to one another in brotherly love, regardless of what we think on this sort of thing. So I'm going to a church that disagrees with me on this. That's okay. A lot of these people are smarter than me and know more than me about it. I still think they're wrong, because that's the nature of having an opinion and diving into these things, but it's okay to disagree on this and to come to different conclusions. Right, so that was a very long speech, and I could keep going on that. What was actually Jace's question? What's the role of women in the New Testament church? Okay, I will answer that more succinctly now that I've gone through my entire diatribe on it. The role of women in the New Testament church is to love God, love their neighbor as themselves, and to spread the gospel. Whether or not they can take leadership roles while doing those things, I would say yes. And why? Because when they did it, Paul said, good job. But it's understandable if you think they can't, because there's a lot of stuff when read at face value that really looks like it's saying they can't. I think those things are encouraging women and men, by the way, to not rebel against the culture unnecessarily, because we want to be able to spread Christ, and it was common in that culture for slaves to obey masters and for women to obey men. And so Paul is not just upending slavery and upending, frankly, misogyny, because that would be disruptive to spreading Christ, and Christ is the focus here. So he's saying, just as Christ submitted on the cross, so too should you submit to these worldly institutions. That's what I think is going on when Paul is giving these commands for women to obey their husbands in that context. But even if that's the case, then if you're in a very conservative climate, like, for example, southern Texas where I live, and you have a bunch of people who think the same thing about women submitting to men, you could readily apply Paul's words and say, hey, this isn't what we should be fighting about. Don't make a big ruckus about it. Just do the thing that is honoring to God by submitting to the culture around you so that you can spread Christ more easily. And I say submitting to the culture, not in things that disobey God, but in things that are not directly in conflict with what the Bible teaches. So I think it's okay to go either way. But yeah, hopefully that answers that question. I'm going to send another test message because it does not like scrolling down. Okay, good, we are at the bottom. So, back to Civ 6. I thought I would be very capable of multitasking between Civ 6 and this sort of discussion. It is becoming apparent that I am less good at that than I thought I would be, but that is okay. I am happy to go back and forth. I've also lost all track of time and don't see anywhere on here. Oh, it does give me the time right on my camera, my phone. That's good. Anywho's daisy. Okay, so what's going on? We're trying to build these holy sites. We need to spread our faith to other cities so we can get the extra production. So we're just going to do that way. Can I do 2 of these? I can because of the city. And we're worried about Brazil attacking, but they didn't a second ago, which surprised us. We're trying to get cities over here so that we can fill up this space before these guys come attack us, and also because we don't want to lose Novgorod. So we need another settler. What other goals do we have in the short term? That's pretty much it. Make friends with our neighbor being the other thing. Also figure out where Gandhi came from, because at some point, yeah, there's his scouts. I'm guessing he came from across the ocean, but that would be really surprising this early in the game. So I'm not sure where he came from. That's fine. Let's do some trade deals in the meantime. We want to be friends with this guy because he's really handy for spreading your religion, because he can't make his own, and because he has this trait, enthusiastic disciple, where he likes civilizations that spread their faith to him. And there we go. The fact that we haven't touched this barbarian camp in a while, at all, since it's gotten there, is probably bad. There's probably a few units down there which are going to be an issue with only having a single archer on this side of the board. But such is life. J. Talloway asks, when did Jesus figure out he was the Messiah, and how was he educated in the scriptures? I do not, so just the short answer first. I don't think the Bible gives us enough information to have a solid answer to that question. It gives us some clues that we can use to make educated guesses, but I think on topics like that, it's important to sort of open with the humility to say, you know, we don't have a solid answer, and there's reasonable guesses on multiple sides here. Having said that, my guess, based off of the way that Jesus talks, for example, in the stories we have about his early life, which are not that many, like one of them, it talks about him visiting the temple as a child, and he gets separated from the caravan where his mother and father are, and they don't know where he went, and they're kind of freaking out. They eventually find him, and he says, "Did you not know I would be in my father's house?" That sort of statement implies that, to me, that even as a child, Jesus perhaps didn't have the full omniscience that he would have had in his nature as God, because we know, for example, he says even he doesn't know the day or the time at which he shall return someday, and, you know, the end of times will be ushered in. So there is some limited omniscience that Christ is imposing upon himself, because as God, he can be fully omniscient, but he doesn't appear to know all things. So the question is, to what extent does that stretch? Sorry for shaking the camera. It was showing low battery, which is odd because it's plugged in. But in any case, we're just going to keep going for now and worry about that later. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. The question is, how much did he limit his omniscience? Did that change at various points throughout his life? We don't know. We do know as a child he had some very unique insights, because it appears he was teaching the rabbis as a child, and that he was able to recognize the temple as the house of his father. And also that wording, at least in that context, seems to me to betray you don't see people speaking so plainly about God as their father, as Jesus is right there. He will be called, I believe, I guess I've never researched this, I believe that God is called Father in the Old Testament, but I'm actually not sure. I can't think of an example off the top of my head of that. I'll have to look into that. In any case, I don't think it's that weird that he's saying the word father, but I do think it's weird that it reads to me as a very casual way of like, oh yeah, it's my father's house. That implies that Jesus had some knowledge that he had a unique connection to God that other humans did not. And also, Mary knew who he was because of the appearance of the angel to Mary and, you know, everything she was told at the front end of all of this. So it would at least be somewhat surprising if Jesus was kind of kept in the dark as to who he was. So I suspect Jesus figured out he was the Messiah as soon as he had real, like, capacity for thought. An infant doesn't think in the same way as a child does. They're not able to, for example, think in sentences usually. Was Jesus able to as an infant? I don't know. I would guess in his humanity, probably not, but in his nature as God, maybe he was. I'm not sure. But in any case, once he was able to think, either Mary told him or he just divinely knew who his true father was, and that it was God, God the Father. So I suspect very early he knew that. And how was he educated in the scriptures? By going to the synagogues. Right there we get an example of him going to I can't remember if they were in Jerusalem, so I believe it was the temple that he's calling his father's house in that context, but it may have been synagogues and I may be mixed up. In any case, as a Jewish child being raised in that area, he would have spent a lot of time in the temples, and that's the only place you would have had to have been crazy rich to own scrolls of the Torah individually. So if you wanted to learn the Torah, you would go to the temple and access, or any of the Old Testament, not just the Torah. You would go to the temples and learn about the scriptures there. So that's, as far as I can guess, where he would have studied such things, just like anyone else. And having said that, being God, I suspect he had a greater level of insight than others, and also some of it, if not all of it, perhaps he just kept that knowledge in his omniscience. But the way that he studied, that he went to the synagogues for seemingly learning purposes, implies to me that there was at least some kind of learning going on there. Jace, if I remember correctly, the father language came about in the intertestamental period of rabbinic writings. That sounds right. Because, it was odd. I didn't think it was unique to Christ. I thought he was using an existing term, but I can't remember it in the Old Testament, so intertestamental makes the most sense. Okay, so we have enough settlers. We really don't want more than 5 cities with the setup we're going with. We desperately need a trader. We do need more shrines because that's our win condition. And we do need more military, although it seems like people are being mostly nice right now. That could change quickly. But we did go down from deity difficulty onto immortal, so we might be okay there. So I'm going to go for the shrine. Slightly greedy play, but I think we'll be okay. Right, so we do have a little bit of a gold issue, but those deals actually do have a little bit of a problem there, but hopefully it'll correct itself. Sometimes it does. So let's go see what the damage is on us leading. Wow, there is nothing going on down here. I thought that barbarian outpost would have gotten a lot worse by now. Yeah, so this guy, Movemba, is upset at us because we haven't spread our religion yet to him, which is something we are going to do shortly. Oh. He was supposed to go the other way. I mixed up the archer and the missionary. Whoops. Okay, galley. Galleys are not ranged units, right? I'm going to double check that, but I don't think they are. No, it is a melee unit, so we can ignore that because we don't have any cities that are on the coast. Okay, now the good news about having... Oh, wow. See, this was the +7 faith holy site we had from earlier. Because we just converted them to Eastern Orthodoxy, that raised... It gave us the ability that allows the adjacency bonus from our holy site to be production. You can see it on screen there, 7 production, which made this shrine go from 8 turns to 1 turn. So that was handy. I am very grateful that this barbarian encampment is not a bigger problem than it's looking like it had become. Okay. So we're going to spread our faith this way first because we don't want to make Brazil mad at us immediately with our having basically no military. And because the Congo just wants us to spread our religion that way. Congo likes that in this game. We do need a trader, we do need an archer. Those are the 2 biggest needs. Because this barbarian encampment isn't looking like a problem, I think it's fine to keep being greedy and go for things other than defense. So similar thought process over here. I'm going to send another test message to make sure that we're at the bottom of the chat. If you are watching, the purpose of the live stream is for me to be able to answer Bible questions, but really just talk about anything you all want to talk about and hang out.
Once
So if you have
again,
any questions,
we are now ready to
happy
choose.
to answer them as best I can. In the meantime, we probably need either Pingala to catch up on our science and culture, or Amani to help out with the city-states. We do have a military city-state right next to us, and we have like no military prowess of our own. Ooh, and we have 2 religious city-states nearby who are both. That's important to us to be able to get those types of the bonuses you get from these. So actually, we'll probably set her up on one of these if they have a good unique bonus. Yerevan's amazing. I'd forgotten this. So it allows, when you make an apostle, to get a special promotion. Yerevan lets you pick, which is really important. And Nazca Line really doesn't matter very much. It's not very strong. So we're going to set her on Yerevan, and we are going to make sure that we remain the suzerain of that area as best we can. As much as the barbarians are a little bit of an issue, we probably need the unit maintenance decrease right now because we're running into financial issues. And I would like to do something financial, but this is only 1 gold, and we don't have any trade routes yet, so it doesn't really do anything to help us. So we will probably just leave it like that. Production is king anyway, because that can let us set things up to improve our financial position pretty quickly. Oh right, we need to unlock temples before we can build those. How do you unlock? It's under civics, and I think, yeah, theology. So we're going to go here, and then we'll beeline theology after that. And we don't really need drama and poetry, so we will go political philosophy, then mysticism, then drama and poetry, then theology, so we can unlock that. Alrighty. So this covers all of the cities we wanted. We will set this one up over here just to get into our 5th city. And it's interesting. I would usually like converting this to a city-state because it's so close and it'll allow you to start out with a bonus to your relationship with that city-state. But I don't want it taking the land that these 2 cities could expand to, so I will probably just knock it out. Chase Alloway asks, was Revelation about the fall of the temple, the end of the world, or something else entirely? So one moment while I use my Civ 6 brain, and then I will use my Bible brain after that. Because I've learned trying to use them both at the same time does no favors to either one. So I would like to put the government plaza adjacent to one of these holy sites. The trouble is, all these tiles next to this one are important because they have good yields. I could put it next to this one, but I'd have to pay for it, and I can't afford it. So that makes me think I should probably just wait to build the government plaza. And yeah, we can get a good campus if we set it here. So either the campus or the archer is probably the play. Let's go archer first, and then we can do the campus later. This is usually not the play this game. Usually I focus pretty heavily on the science stuff, but that makes less sense when you're Russia and you get a bonus for catching up on science. Okay, Revelation. Are we preterist? Paraphrasing the question. So let's just talk about the different views of it. Again, we'll tackle this the same way where we go through the different schools of thought, and then we'll pick which one we think is probably right, to the extent that this can be simplified to the point where one is right and the others are wrong. I think that even that alone might be oversimplifying the subject. But we'll do our best. And again, note, I know a thing or two about Revelation, but I am by no means an authority on the subject, and there are people who have devoted pretty much their entire ministry to that subject to trying to get that exact issue right. So feel free to check out other resources. That's what it was building this whole time. That's really funny. Oh, no, this one's ranged. That's dangerous. Anyway, so in Revelation, there are a few schools of thought, and there's kind of 2 axes to look at. One is just in general, how do you interpret Revelation? And the second is how does that interface with the return of Christ? And specifically how that relates to the millennial kingdom. So for Revelation in general, there's 4 axes you can look at, 4 perspectives on the book. One is futurist, which is saying Revelation is making claims of what's going to happen in the future. This is probably the one most people are most familiar with. You read Revelation, you assume this is end times, and it's talking about what's going to happen later. The second is historicist, which I don't actually... These are typically separated as 2 views. I think that's kind of wrong. I think historicist is a type of futurist, because what a historicist says is it says these events are things in the future, and hey, here's events that have happened recently in history, so I can line up when these things are likely to happen. It's essentially an overconfident futurist, if I'm being honest. It's a person who thinks these things are future events, and I can figure out exactly when it's going to happen. Obviously, from the way I'm talking about it, you can tell I think that's a little unreasonable. People have tried this over and over and been wrong over and over, so I think it's better to just take a posture of humility with it and not try to predict when exactly these events will occur. But in any case, the third is what's called a preterist. A preterist says that what Revelation is talking about already happened. It's talking specifically, for the most part, about the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Which was incredibly significant as far as basically destroying a huge part of ancient Hebrew identity, which with the Bible being mainly a Jewish book in terms of where it came from, even the New Testament being written by almost entirely Jewish authors, the destruction of the temple is incredibly significant on the scale of biblical events, even though it did technically happen after most of the New Testament was written. It's still very important biblical event. So is Revelation just talking about that event? And then there's also what's called a partial preterist, which is the more, in my opinion, reasonable flavor of preterism, which will say most of Revelation, in this case, is past events, but the part at the very end is still future. Because I think if you don't leave room for that, then you have Christ already returned, and this is the after that phase. And the world doesn't look like that to me. And it also kind of feels like we missed Christ's second coming, which doesn't comport with the rest of Scripture. So most preterists aren't full preterists, they're partial preterists, where they're saying most of the book already happened, but not all of it. The last perspective is what's called an idealist. And an idealist says, look, Revelation is giving us these ideas about how God interfaces with nations, and how nations will get proud and puffed up and oppose God over and over and over, and yet there is this cycle where God nevertheless defeats these nations and shows God's sovereignty, and how God's ways will always win, and how there's this kingdom that is not like the kingdoms of this world in a very literal physical sense, but there's this kingdom of God, which is a spiritual existence, and Revelation talks about how that kingdom in a spiritual sense will triumph over the literal physical kingdoms of the world by using divine imagery in the form of these prophecies. It's the idealist perspective is somewhat a liberalization of the text in the sense that it takes almost nothing literal, and which, in fairness, I think a lot of Revelation, most everyone would agree, is not literal, but it goes the furthest in taking things as non-literal and as saying, look, it's basically just patterns, more or less. It's just a general exhortation that Christ conquers and triumphs over the nations of this world, even when things look bad. So, which one of those is best? Which one of those is right? I would argue that if you are sitting solely in any of those camps, you are in, frankly, a dangerous position, because there are aspects of Revelation that are, in my opinion, pretty clearly doing each of these. So let's talk about futurist. Has Christ returned? No. Has the new heaven and new Jerusalem been set up? No. Are those talking about purely symbolic things and not literal future events? No. Those are literal future events. So, do I think the futurists are right, especially in terms of the end of Revelation? Yes, and I think almost all Christians agree with me on that. There are some who don't, but they're in a very small minority. Are the preterists right? Insofar as, for example, 666, the number of the beast, referring to Caesar Nero and what he was going to do, revolving around his attacking and killing many Jews and Christians, mostly Christians, in that time. Yeah, I think it is talking about early events that have already happened. If you look at that number, so in Hebrew, each letter corresponds to a number. So this doesn't work in English. A doesn't mean one in English, right? But in Hebrew, Aleph, Bet, I'm blanking on the order of is it Gimel next and then Dalet. Anyway, each letter in Hebrew corresponds to a number. And so the way you counted in Hebrew, the way you made numbers, it wasn't like a decimal system where in Arabic numerals, if you want to say 100, you go 100. If you were to put those numbers next to each other in Hebrew, that would be 1 because it's 1 plus 0 plus 0. They sum these numbers instead of doing sort of decimal places the way we do, right? So when you see 666, if you add up the letters from Caesar Neron, which Neron, the N at the end, would be the way that his name would be pronounced in Hebrew. If you add up the letters of those add up the numbers corresponding to those Hebrew letters, you get 666. And I think in the context of the passage, Caesar fits, Nero specifically, fits like a glove. And there's a minority of manuscripts that say, I believe it's 626, which is how it adds up if you use the Greek pronunciation of the name instead of the Hebrew pronunciation, which tells me some scribe somewhere was writing Revelation in Greek, which is the language it was written in, saw Nero instead of Neron, and went, wait a minute, that doesn't add up to 666, that's 626, let me fix it. Which shows at a bare minimum there was a scribal tradition that agreed with the reading I'm talking about. And there's tons of other stuff in Revelation, tons of people will geek out about this, and there's so many cool things that line up with the temple destruction in 70 AD that I don't know how you don't admit that at least the partial preterists are partially correct, right? Then for the idealists, I mean, so many examples there are throughout all of Scripture where we get what's called an already not yet, and this is an expression often used by what's called dispensationalists. I'm not really fully a dispensationalist, but they still have some cool ideas, where prophecies will be made, and there will be a partial fulfillment of that prophecy that paves the way for a future full fulfillment of that prophecy. So, for example, there might be a prophecy about how a nation of this world will be overcome by God. And then that'll literally happen. But the full fulfillment of that prophecy is the way that God will someday triumph over the nations of this world. And again, we see that kind of theme throughout all of Revelation. So I heard the term ecumenical idealist thrown around once for someone who borrows ideas from all of these, but sort of puts their camp alongside the idealists. That's the closest description I've heard to how I would think about it, but I'm a little hesitant to even align that heavily with the idealists. I just think you need to borrow ideas from all of them to get to the quote-unquote correct view of Revelation. I think prophecy, most people today assume when they hear the word prophecy that it's about predicting the future. I do not think that is how an ancient Hebrew person would have understood the word prophecy. I think they would have understood the word prophecy to mean God unveiling truths to man through prophets. And so that truth that's being unveiled doesn't have to be a truth about the future. It can be a truth about the past or the present or the future or themes that happen through all of those. And that's just not just an idea of Revelation. You see that in, for example, Nathan the prophet's prophecy to David about how David did a bad thing by sleeping with Bathsheba and getting her husband killed. He has divine knowledge of that event, even though he has no way to know about it. And then he expresses the truth of David's sin to David through a parable about a man who stole a sheep from another guy, where it was the other guy's only sheep. I'm not going to go into detail on that right now. In any case, my point is there are examples in both Old Testament and New Testament prophecy where it's unveiling a truth that isn't necessarily a truth about the future. Not to say there aren't truths about the future in prophecy. There clearly are, but it's both. And I think Revelation is no different. Hopefully that answers your question. The other axis that I alluded to but didn't go into detail on was whether you think Jesus is going to come pre-mill, before the millennium, post-mill, after the millennium, or amill. There is no millennium kingdom. I would lean towards the last of those. When it says 1,000 years, in ancient Hebrew thought, 1,000 was the number that you used to describe really impossibly large number, which is funny by today's standards because we so commonly deal with numbers bigger than that, but that just didn't happen very often when you're talking on the scale of like, how many sheep do you have, right? Rarely do you have more than 1,000. And so when they talked about the number 1,000, it could have just been a secondary way of referring to unimaginably large number. Wow, that's a lot of boats. So, because of that, I think most likely that's what the 1,000 years alludes to. I don't think it's a literal 1,000 years. I think most likely it's just a long period, which Emil. So hopefully that answers your question. I don't see any more comments yet, but it has a habit of not showing me, so I'm going to send a test message so it scrolls to the bottom. There we go. Okay. We are all caught up. So, how are we doing on Civ 6? Well, I haven't built a single builder right now, which is just incorrect play on my part. I just hadn't been thinking about it. So we do need to catch up in that department. I also need to really prioritize, obviously, the faith stuff, but we've been doing that because we're going for a religious win, but also commercial hubs, because Peter gets, that's the Civ we're playing as over here, gets a really important boost to his science and culture by using trade routes towards nations he's behind on those things, and I'm going to be behind everyone basically the whole time during this game. So it would be very good to focus on trade routes as best I can, which means commercial hubs. Whoops. We are now trying to spread our faith to these surrounding areas. Because this has already been converted to Catholicism, it would probably be easier to convert a city that hasn't been converted yet, and go about it that way. This one we kind of have to fight over because this is our city, but that other one we can go to the non-claimed cities first and then come back to this one later, if it works out that way. Okay. Oh, I actually had built one builder. I just forgotten about him, but in any case, not enough of them. We need these horses. That's important, and then we should also build around those other things. We are just going to knock out this barbarian camp and then run away from the boats, and hopefully we live long enough to tell the tale. That is a really good spot to put a commercial hub. Excellent. Okay, so let's check just on the score how things are going. Obviously, we're behind on most everything. That is kind of part of the plan. On a religious victory, we are in second in terms of cities converted. Our main competition appears to be Pedro, our friend over here, which is good and bad. It's bad because he's going to be competing directly with us for most of the game. He's right next to us. But the good news is, with him being next to us, he'll be the second nation we knock out. And once we do that, the rest will fall like dominoes because he's the only other person who seems to be focusing on it so far. Although Gandhi usually focuses somewhat, so we'll see if that ends up being the case. I suppose I haven't actually checked if Gandhi was one of the other ones who had a religion. No, he is not. Although there's only been 3 founded, and I think there's space for 4 in this map size. So we will see. Really hope he's not, because he tends to prioritize it when he does. Hopefully we can get the capital of Congo converted with just this one missionary. We have a lot of faith, though, that I haven't been using, so we should probably get some more missionaries built up. Let's see. We're going to go for Classical Republic. Pretend we are Greek for a moment. And change out our policy cards. We don't really need most of these military ones. The one that decreases unit maintenance isn't bad, but it's not great either. We may end up using it only because we have 2 of these gold ones already, and there aren't that many that are useful to us. Right now we're building builders, though. And then for the other one, probably this trade-out one is better. Will be better soon than this one here. So we'll go for that. Also, just for people to know, if you're new to the chat, the purpose of what we're doing today is more or less I am just talking about the Bible, so if you have any questions about it, then feel free to ask. I'm happy to talk about anything. And playing some Civ 6 in the meantime. So if you're interested in either of those 2 things, Civ 6 or the Bible, or you just want to hang out, then you're welcome to do that. And that's what this live stream is for. Okay. The handy thing about these markets is they give you more trade route capacity, which is why we were going for that commercial hub in the first place. So we are going to build that. And then we're going to bring our archer back into our borders so we can heal up faster. wish I had 50 gold so I can do the better adjacency bonus over here. It's probably worth trading to try to get it. Unfortunately, nobody likes me right now. 3 gold for the 30 terms would equate to 90 gold. They usually give a lot less than that, so let's see if we can get 60 out of them. No, we cannot. Let's see if we can get that 50 gold from anyone else. He's getting less than the first fellow was. And let's see how much Gandhi is willing to give us. Less. So we're going to get the most from Movemba. We will give him our 4 horses for... Hopefully we can at least get 40. Okay. I wouldn't usually go this specific, but we're really towing the line as to how quickly we can build up that holy site on the ideal spot. We can't really trade anything else, because the other thing I'd give is maybe 1 gold per turn to get gold. Let's see how much he'd be willing to give. Usually they'll only give something like 12 or 13, which might actually be worth it in this case, even though you're basically giving 30 gold to get like 9. The fact that we would get, yeah, it's fine. The holy site immediately makes a significant enough difference that it's fine to do that otherwise bad trade. Okay, no more questions in the meantime. So yeah, I would say we're actually in a very good position here for a religious victory so far, because we have our beginning empire set up, we have good adjacency bonuses on our holy sites, and we are making progress towards getting a religious win, and towards catching up on the areas we fell behind on while focusing on those things, since we're now getting trade routes. And we actually have a few archers, which is not an impressive military by any stretch of the imagination, but is a lot better than we were doing before. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and get masonry, so if we do get attacked, we can build a wall quickly as necessary. Hopefully that won't become necessary, but better to have it than to not have it. And again, we're prioritizing Yerevan because we want the buffs they give to... well, actually, I probably should have agreed to that now I think about it, because I don't have room to put the the writing anywhere else. I will go back to him and offer that back, because he was making a good offer. And then I can use the second writing from this fellow. So going back to Movemba, make deal, give him this. What would you give me? That works for me. And then we will replace it with a new writing. Jason always says, I'll leave you to it. Need to get back working on my defense stock. Good luck, and Godspeed. You're going to do great on Tuesday. I will be sure to listen. My friend Jace here, and also a co-manager of the channel, is working on his PhD and is giving his defense on Tuesday. So be praying for that, even though if anyone doesn't need it, it's Jace. He's going to do amazing, but still nice to have people in your corner praying. We could work towards engineering, again, to help us defensively. We really don't need much other than that, because the game's goal really for us at this point is to work on the religious stuff, which mostly isn't on the tech tree, and to not die. So as far as not dying goes, yeah, we will rush machinery, because crossbows are good for not dying. We do need to start purchasing our missionaries, which I've been neglecting to do for some very silly reason. So I will make a few of these now. And once we have temples, then we can get an apostle, which we can use to improve our faith. So we'll save some for that once we get forward a little bit on the culture tree. It'd be nice to focus a little on culture with things like monuments now that we're in a more safe position, so we will do that. And we're getting suzerainty of Yerevan, which is something we very much wanted. Here we're just sending these over to try to convert the Congos area. So we have 7 turns left before we get to before we go to the next era. It would be nice to get this era score to 35 before then, in order to get a golden age in the next era. The easiest way to do that would be to spread our faith to one more city. But that is a little difficult to do on that timetable because it's taking a while for these guys to walk over here. Actually, if we just send both of these two after Kinshasa, I bet they, working together, can get it there. So we will try that. Okay, good. Pedro likes us now. That is handy.
The poets have been mysteriously silent on the subject of cheese.
Indeed, they have. The poets have been mysteriously silent on the subject of cheese. That's one of my favorite quotes from this game. It's I have no idea what the context is. I don't ever bother to read who originally said it, but it is a true statement.
Benefits to both of our... We don't have great adjacency bonuses over in Voronezh, no matter what we build, in terms of which one of these. We do need more campuses. Actually, we have pretty good adjacencies for this. Not, I say campus, more commercial hubs to get more trade routes. So that's probably what's next. The other priorities could be a monument or just more builders. But I think commercial hubs probably right, because trade hubs, or because markets, and then trade routes are a high priority for us right now to try to catch up using Ratcha's unique ability. In the meantime, how many turns we have? 5 left. We should be able to convert Kinshasa no problem before that point. Especially because it already has Eastern Orthodoxy, sort of the secondary faith here. Well, good. We got it with 1 charge. And that should give us, there we go, we have enough era score to get a golden age for the next era. Okay, usually I would set up my trade routes to all be on a single city so that I could get just a crazy amount of production from these types of production bonuses. But in this case, because most things are going for are gold, science, and culture, which aren't city-specific. It's better to spread them out so they can each go to whatever the best city is, which in this case is either Rio de Janeiro or Salvador de Bahia, however you say that. So I am going to go with Rio because we actually care a little more about culture right now between the two of those trying to, well, the thing we want is one turn away either way, but science really just doesn't matter as much for religious victory in this game. So we'll want a granary soon once the population goes up one more, but we have 8 turns until growth, so we don't really need that yet because the main point to it is the 2 housing, not the 1 food. 1 food's a pretty small bonus. The water mill is not a great investment, but it's not that bad. Builders are probably better right now because we don't have much of the land developed around our other cities, so we'll just keep doing that.
Man suffers only because he takes.
Okay, this bonus to holy site adjacency is, as they say, redonkulous in terms of just getting a really high production total in all of our cities because we have that bonus that gives us production equal to our holy site's faith bonus. So this will be significant, and now things are just going to spawn into being an Astrakhan, which has a +7, and now +14 holy site bonus, which is giving us +14 production every single turn. So that will that'll probably be our best city throughout this game. And we will rush Divine Right so we can get an improved government.
People who cannot find.
So here we're going to agree with him and not spread our faith to him for a little bit. But later in the... Actually, he already is friendly with us. I'm just going to tell him no, because he's going to try spreading to us either way, and we do need to spread our faith to him eventually, and I don't think I want to wait until that promise wears off. So we're just going to tell him we're going to do it anyway.
A great merchant.
Okay, we got Calais, who, wow, that's handy. He is a great merchant who gives faith. And we get an extra copy of a luxury resource. The question is, do we want to spread him somewhere, send him somewhere to a resource we don't actually have access to? That would be ideal, but we don't want to have to walk too far to do that. I don't think we have access to salt, and we can get salt pretty easily. Although, we're going to get access to that when these borders expand anyway. Oh wait, no, that's actually already in Brazil's territory. So yeah, we will head over there to get access to salt.
Great need.
Normal people believe...
Oh, we did have access to salt. I just missed it. In any event, we don't have much access to salt, and it would take a long walk to get anything else we don't have, so we will just go ahead and take the salt. So we're going to try to win this vote. I think we're probably going to fail, but we're not going for a diplomatic victory. So there's no motivation to just try to vote with the crowd. Better to just spend our, I forget what the points are called, diplomatic favor, to try to get things that are helpful to us. In this case, include improving our trade routes. Unfortunately, Gandhi got that one, so oh well. We're going to use these apostles to improve our religion. So I think the best two here are missionary zeal and holy order, and I think holy order is probably the better of the two. So I'm going to go for that one. And then for the other, it's a little more of a difficult question. So these only apply to the cities you possess. It's not if cities in other civilizations have followers of your religion that you get those things. It would mean that civilization, for following it, would get that bonus. So because we kind of have a low-ish population, none of these are going to be all that helpful to us, just to be frank. And we only have 5 cities. We're not planning to build a lot more, so things like these two that go for every city following it probably aren't going to do that much for it. So 2 faith is better than anything else here for us in this specific game where we're going for a religious victory. So we'll just go for pilgrimage. I think that's enough to have majority Congo. No, apparently majority Congo is not converted to our religion yet. That is surprising because we have. Well, I suppose we only have 3 cities. I guess that means he has at least 6. I'm not sure if it rounds in our favor at 6. Oh no, we lost Kinshasa. That's why. Odd. Guess it's in fog of war, so probably Russia sent or Brazil sent some of his missionaries over there.
May I make a suggestion?
The Lord made us all. I've lived through some terrible things in my life, some of which actually happened. As a young boy, my brother...
So we mostly here want these apostles who can attack the other religious units, almost in like a sort of theological warfare thing. It's kind of more of a debate format than like an actual murder format. But we want them to go over to this region and beat up the other religious units to help us out in this sort of battle between our two faiths.
New grass. You don't even know. Remember that people defense is superior to...
Oh, well, my phone died. So that's probably the end of the stream, because you will not be able to see me otherwise. So, in the darkness, thank you very much for watching. Yeah, thanks for watching the first ever stream. God bless, and have a great day.